very much. Mr. Orwin.
Mr. Skiss, if you've got your statement still in front of you, which you do, look at paragraph 48, please, which is page 14.
Yep.
And there you say you couldn't recall any specific occasion from memory due to the time which has passed since the relevant period. However, in your role as Deputy Director, you would have been privy to some of the concerns raised by staff, whether this was through the formal whistleblowing policy or the general complaints process. And you say if you were made aware of any occasion where someone raised concerns in relation to the treatment of a detained person, formally or informally, you would evaluate the information and make any appropriate decisions. If you go on to paragraph 50, there you deal with the response of staff members when action is taken against colleagues. You say that's not something you could really comment on because you wouldn't really be party to what they say, but you add procedures are in place for people to say something if they thought or think something was or is inappropriate. I think that people felt comfortable reporting or using these reporting systems, as we did get a few reports from staff about staff as far as I can remember. Now, the few reports you talk about, in the scheme of things, are you saying that we're forgetting grievances amongst SMT members, but we're talking about serious reports from one staff member about another, complaining about mistreatment or abuse or derogatory language? Are those the few reports you're talking about there?
I think it could be any report that any member of staff felt uncomfortable that they wanted to raise in a perhaps more open forum.
Yeah.
Some staff, in my opinion, would have perhaps felt more comfortable to either contact the Speak Out line.
Speak up just a bit, yeah.
The Speak Out line.
Yes.
Or some staff may feel comfortable to put they could put a confidential SIR in, and I had seen some from staff that had been anonymous, or or through those channels.
Given the nature and scale of the abuse that the inquiry has heard about, are you prepared to accept, Mr. Skitt, that the procedures for complaining couldn't have functioned very well?
Yes.
You're prepared to accept that?
For the incident, yes, because obviously
carry on.
We didn't know about those concerns until after the incident at a later point in time.
Because I gave you one example of Owen Syred a little earlier,
Yeah.
but by and large people didn't report, did they, what was going on? Otherwise you should have known about it.
I think in the examples of the programme itself, that is correct, yeah, because we didn't know and nobody did report it.
Yeah, I mean, if we look at a document, if we can put it up on screen, Zainab, IMB 000026. And this is a Brook House Independent Monitoring Board IMB meeting of the 20th of September. Well, this is a month after you've first been notified of the BBC allegations.
Yep.
And it was 2.5 weeks or so after the programme had been aired on BBC. And if we look, please, on page 2, under item 4, monthly reports from Home Office and G4S, SS for G4S, that's you, discussed the recent BBC Panorama programme, advised on a number of points listed below. One, prior to the programme airing, preemptive work had taken place within the centre to ensure there were no issues within Brook. Staff and detainees had been spoken to and letters distributed. So, pausing there, what was the preemptive work which had taken place?
To highlight the fact that there was going to be a programme.
Right.
To communicate to residents, staff, that the programme was going to be aired, and I think it kind of stated the time and the date within that, just so people are aware of it.
Yes, we can see a number of other actions. It's really towards the bottom on this topic I want to ask you about. Do you see the main paragraph at the foot of the page? If
Yes.
we can scroll up, please, Aina. And you see we've got JL suggesting that apart from the suspended staff, there could be other staff that agreed with the behaviour of suspended officers. How would G4S change this culture or ethos? And it's this. SS advised that within the action plan there were points to address this issue. These include building more trust in the whistleblower system and also the use of body-worn cameras by all officers that recorded continually the info being downloaded at the end of each shift.
Yep.
LH asked how staff would be encouraged to whistleblow. SS advised that all staff would be receiving letters about speaking out and explaining the system is anonymous and run by a third party. Rather suggests that after this particular horse had bolted, you were looking at the whistleblowing system and realising it wasn't fit for purpose.
The whistleblowing process was in place. It was there for staff to use. We know staff did use it because we'd had some reports come through. However, I think after this, it was noted that there would be importance for staff, if they did want to raise anything, the whistleblowing process was in place. And we sent letters to all the staff with whistleblowing cards on, just as a kind of belt and braces, really, to impact on the importance of it.
It clearly hadn't been functioning as G4S had hoped up to that point, had it?
I can't comment if it was...
Yeah.
Well, yes, you would have hoped there'd have been some reports from the incident.
But there hadn't been.
There hadn't been, no.
And we also know from Callum Tully that a poster or posters informing staff members about the speak out policy within Brook House itself had been scrawled over with snitch, grass, those sorts of words. Did you know that?
Some posters, not just those, others, if they were found to be defaced, they'd have been taken down and replaced.
We don't know whether that one was taken down or not, but it was sufficient for Callum Tully to tell us about it. But it shows, doesn't it, that if that was going on and the speak out policy was being defaced in that way, presumably by other staff members, then insofar as whistleblowing is concerned, it was perfectly clear that if you blow the whistle, you're going to be ostracised as a snitch or a grass, and that's exactly what happened to Owen Syred.
I mean, in the case of Callum Tully's comments, I can't confirm or deny that there was one of what he said. However, if we had have noticed any posters defaced or then they would have been taken down and replaced.
Presumably for another one to go up and to be defaced in the same way.
Well, sometimes you can't account for people who want to write silly things on bits of paper, can you?
Are you saying you weren't aware of that, though?
I wasn't aware of that particular
So
incident,
on the
no.
times that you'd gone round the wings or wherever this poster had been, in my recollection from what Callum Tully said, although it was a long time ago, it was outside some lavatories where the poster was on a wall. But as far as you're concerned, in all the time you were there, you've never seen a poster defaced in that way? Speak out poster?
I have. I've seen posters defaced. I can't particularly relate to that particular one, no.
Well, have you seen speak out posters defaced in a way which made perfectly clear that anybody using the hotline would be regarded as a grass?
No, I haven't.
No. How have you seen speak out posters defaced then?
I didn't particularly mention speak out posters. Some posters.
Well, I'm talking about, forget the other posters,
Okay.
Mr. Skid.
No,
I'm only talking
I
about
can't.
speak out ones.
No, I can't recall any, no.
Let's move on, please. In your, back to your statement, paragraph 52 and onwards, you'll recall that you were asked to go through recommendations which had been made by HMIP as a result of their visit between the 31st of October and the 11th of November 2016. Yeah?
Yep.
And you set out there, and I'm not going to go through them because it would just, I'm afraid, take up too much time, but you set out reasonably clearly the recommendations which were accepted and those, or part accepted, and those which were rejected in paragraphs 53 and 54, and they all relate to the action plan which G4S and indeed the Home Office considered in relation to the recommendations made. And Chair, for the record, the inspection report is VER 000117. What I'd like to know, looking at all of those recommendations, those partially accepted and those rejected, who made the decisions about them?
So you'd receive the HMIP report. We would then start drafting responses to that.
Yeah.
We would also do this in consultation with the Home Office as well, because ultimately the agreed action plan was between the Home Office and ourselves.
Yeah.
So we will work through the draft of that, and then, if I recall correctly, we would have held a number of meetings.
Who's the we?
G4S, SMT,
And at what level?
and the Home Office.
Sorry. What level within G4S?
The SMT from the director downwards.
Right. And so it's Ben Saunders, it's you, it's Michelle Brown,
Yep.
and others within the SMT at that level are looking at the HMIP report, and you are making the decisions about whether recommendations should or shouldn't be accepted.
Yes.
Who signs off on those recommendations from G4S's point of view?
Ultimately, the director.
You mean Mr. Saunders?
Yes. Ben Saunders, yeah.
Does it go any higher than the centre director? Does the company itself have to sign off on the recommendations? Because there may be cost effects.
The company would be involved. I'm not sure if any of those would have to sign off on it.
Yeah.
My understanding, and I may stand to be corrected at some point, is it was the director's responsibility.
So when you say director, because
Ben Saunders.
one
Sorry,
thinks of company
Ben
directors,
Saunders, yeah.
you're thinking of the centre director,
The centre director,
Yeah.
yeah.
which is a huge responsibility.
Yes.
And so you have a series of meetings amongst the whole of the SMT or just certain members of the SMT?
No, it'd be the whole of the SMT,
Yeah.
and it could involve other members from the Gatwick team, because it may be relevant that it may refer to a particular area.
Yep.
Where the person who manages that area may not be within the SMT,
Yep.
but would perhaps be the expert
Yeah.
to give advice.
Yeah. Do you receive any external advice, or is the whole thing done in-house?
External replies from...
Advice. Do you receive any external advice upon the impact of a particular recommendation?
It's normally done between G4S and the Home Office.
Yeah. So it's all done internally.
All done, yeah.
And the meetings the SMT has, are any Home Office members invited, or is it strictly SMT of G4S?
I think, by memory, I think initially we would draft the responses, and then we would involve the Home Office at a fairly senior level within the Home Office to decide with those actions. But there may be consultation along the way,
Yeah.
depending on what the action is.
And a lengthy process? Several meetings?
Oh, yes, certainly, yeah.
Yeah. So the ultimate decision as far as G4S is concerned to accept recommendations or reject them is who?
Well, ultimately, it would be the centre director, Ben
Yeah.
Saunders, or whoever the centre director is at the time.
Yeah. In the report of HMP for that 2016 period I was talking about, there was a detained person survey. Did you appreciate that? A survey?
Yes, I'm aware there's always a survey
Yeah.
when HMIP come in, yeah.
Let's put the document up on screen, VER 000117, and to begin with at page 20. So here's the report. Here's the first page, which Zainab has just taken off the screen. But that was, as we saw, the 31st of October to the 11th of November 2016. And this is page 20, and we see at 1.13, under the heading Bullying and Violence Reduction, and we'll come to the survey in a moment. This was about everyone feeling safe from bullying and victimisation, and that detainees at risk or subject to victimisation are protected through active and fair systems known to staff and detainees. And the report says, in our survey, 37% of detainees reported feeling unsafe, 21% reported victimisation by other detainees, and 18% by staff. So that is a very bare summary of one part of the survey, and we can see the survey itself if we go to page 69. It's Appendix 4. Summary of detainee survey responses, and there are headers for sampling, how the questionnaire was distributed and collected, and towards the bottom, the survey response. Right at the bottom, at the time of the survey on the 31st of October 2016, the detainee population at Brook House was 392. Using the method described above, questionnaires were distributed to a sample of 209 detainees. We received a total of 159 completed questionnaires, a response rate of 76%. This included a questionnaire completed via interview. 9 respondents refused to complete the questionnaire, and 41 questionnaires were not returned. 76, please, page 76. Right at the bottom, section 7 is staff. Question 43, do you have a member of staff at the centre that you can turn to for help if you have a problem? 97 or 66% said yes, 34%, 49 said no. Do most staff, question 44, at the centre treat you with respect? 107 of the returns, which equated to 77%, said yes. 23%, equating to 32 returns, said no. And then over the page, question 45 at the top. Have any members of staff physically restrained you, CNR, in the last 6 months? 13% yes, 87% no. And then question 46, have you spent a night in the separation isolation unit in the last 6 months? 17% said yes, 83% said no. And then under the heading safety, question 50, has a member of staff or group of staff victimised, insulted or assaulted you here? 22 of the returns said yes, that was 18%. 82%, which were 99, said no. You must have been aware of all of this, Mr. Skit.
We would have had this in the report at the time, yeah.
And what was done about that? Because you'll agree, won't you? You can't take, as a deputy director of a centre like this, you can't take any comfort from 18% of the people returning those questionnaires saying that they had been victimised by staff or a group of staff, which meant insulted or assaulted.
No, you can't.
No.
I agree.
So what was done about it?
I can't. I know we would have gone through this. I know we would have looked at it within the safer custody team. It's gone nearly 6 years ago.
I really can't hear you, I'm afraid.
I said it's nearly 6 years ago. I can't specifically remember exactly what we did with this piece of information.
Yeah. If we look at question 51, if you have felt victimised by a member of staff or group of staff, what did the incident involve? physical abuse, being hit, kicked or assaulted, 3%. Because of your nationality, 6%. Drugs, 2%. Because you have a disability, none. Because of your religion or religious beliefs, 1%. Even those figures are too high, aren't they?
Well, I think any figures are too high in that respect.
Yeah.
But I mean, what incidents they relate to, I wouldn't know, because obviously this is anecdotal information that we would get from a survey or report.
Well, it's not that anecdotal, because if you look at question 52, if you've been victimised by detainees or staff, did you report it? 12% said yes, 14% said no. So if this survey was accurate or near accurate, there ought to be 13 reports in answer to this survey of individuals who said that they had been victimised by detainees or staff, and they reported it.
So if it had been gone for the complaint procedure and they'd reported for the complaints which go to the Home Office, without knowing details from this report, I wouldn't know what had been reported and what had been...
Yeah.
I mean, if a complaint had gone in, it would have been investigated.
Yeah, but taking it at face value, Mr. Skip, these should have been worrying figures for you and Mr. Saunders.
And again, I'm trying to recall on something a number of years ago, and there would have been, you know, I think there would have been concerning for the SMT.
Yeah.
As a whole.
And you can't tell us what you did about it?
I can't recall
No.
what we did. No.
Let's move on to a different topic now, please. In paragraph 60 and onwards, you were asked in this section to deal with external bodies. And at paragraph 60 on your page 22 and onwards, you deal with the Gatwick Detainees Welfare Group. And I'd like to ask you a few things about them.
Yep.
You say at 60 in the final line, the service of the GDWG is invaluable in my opinion. Yeah?
Yep.
Did you always hold that view?
I've always held that view, and I've always said that the service that the Gatwick Welfare Group set out to provide with social support for residents, particularly around visiting. They will also look at destitute clothing, provide support, monetary support, and other support for residents.
Yeah, you say it was a body originally set up as an organisation to provide social and pastoral support for residents.
Yeah.
You will have seen, I think, a statement from James Wilson,
I have.
who in effect described them as having an advocacy role in offering help to detained persons. Yes? You accept that?
I accept that they are there. What do you mean within advocacy?
Or advocating on their behalf?
Sorry, I'm a bit unsure of.
Well, let's look at what he has to say. It's GDW 000001 at page 3. This is a statement Mr. Wilson made in the High Court in 2018. And paragraph 10, he talks about the Gatwick Detainee Welfare Group. It's a registered charity at paragraph 8, works to improve the welfare and well-being of people held in detention by offering friendship, practical and emotional support, and advocating for fair treatment. That's what I mean, and that's what he means by advocacy. Advocating on their behalf, advancing their cases, if you like. Did you understand that?
I think there's in regards to their casework, I just want to understand it correctly, that we're talking about signposting where people can go.
I'm simply reading to you what he says, Mr. Skit. And then paragraph 9, he talks about the network that they have. Visitors form the core of our work, and their role is to meet detainees, offer empathy, constructive advice, practical help, friendship to ameliorate the experience of detention. And 10, in addition, employs a small team of advocacy coordinators or staff who offer practical help to detainees, including, and he sets out a whole list of the sort of help that they offer. Now, did you understand that this is what GDWG was all about at the time you were Deputy Director for G4S?
Certainly with paragraph 10, yes.
So what didn't you understand?
That my understanding was, and from their kind of guidance that they published to residents, that they would cover the elements that they've highlighted in paragraph 10 of this report.
Did you understand that they advocated on behalf of residents, as you call them, for fair treatment? Did you understand that?
I understood that there are other parts to their role as an organisation, yes.
Paragraph 64 of your statement, Mr. Skit, about 4 lines down, page 23, you say there were certain members of the GDWG who became too involved in residents' cases. A lot of people thought this was inappropriate and thought that these types of actions would get in the way of what the GDWG was there to do.
Yep.
For example, they were getting involved with casework and questioning medical treatment given to residents. The IMB also raised concerns that members of the GWG were contacting them to get information for residents. A line or two down, in addition, the group were raising safeguarding issues and healthcare complaints on behalf of a resident. However, they weren't following specific processes we have in place for raising concerns, and so on and so forth. Was that your view, that the GWG were overreaching their remit?
There were a number of concerns that were raised through, certainly from the IMB. The IMB contacted me and said they were concerned about contact. There was also a concern, and I think James Wilson says in his kind of statement about wanting another visit with the residents because he believed he got mental health issues and he wanted to inquire. Well, the way I read it was inquire into that more. Now, my concern was, and I think some of this has got lost in translation with James, is it's quite right that anybody raises a concern. My concern was of what channels those concerns are raised. And you can contact another body, but I was worried whether something could be missed that could be detrimental to a resident in our care, particularly around safeguarding, particularly about mental health, because we'd want to know that information and signpost it as quickly as we can to the appropriate people to deal with it, such as healthcare, or if it's a safeguarding issue, we can very quickly go to the wing managers to kind of raise our concerns about a particular individual, and they can look at their processes around safeguarding quite quickly. I think one example I can give is, and I know it's mentioned in here, is about the gentleman that had a burnt foot. And that come to light, and that come to me, and I received a long email kind of raising the concerns about this gentleman, which was quite right. And it was basically saying, well, we believe he should have some kind of aid, crutches, or wheelchair, etc., which, from what I saw, I didn't disagree with, and was quite concerned that we'd actually got somebody in the centre in this position. I initially contacted the healthcare, because whether this had been kind of seen on screening, and what had we done. When I did contact the healthcare, they were aware of it, and I says, well, from a layman's point of view, then why can't we supply, crutches or a wheelchair or whatever was deemed appropriate to support this resident? And I mean, I didn't know this, but for anybody that requires crutches or any kind of aid, you have to see a physiotherapist. And I said, well, can't the doctor do it? And they said, no, the doctor's, strangely enough, not qualified to do this, because they have to come in and measure a person up for these aids. So I said, right, where are we? Where's our next port of call? And I had a discussion with the healthcare manager, Sandra Calver, and either she'd already agreed or we agreed between us that we would pay for a physiotherapist to come in and assess the gentleman. And I believe that literally happened a day or two after. So it's just an example. If to me, it wasn't around we want to be difficult. It wasn't around that we're trying to be obstructive. The point I was trying to put across to James on numerous occasions was, if we signposted directly to the right person in the first place, and I was kind of, concerns, they had a very good working relationship with the welfare team on site. They had a very good relationship, I think, with Safer Custody, and they did use those departments as a conduit. However, they don't work 24/7, so I think what I was just trying to say, if there are any concerns very similar to the one I've just mentioned, then please direct it to myself, or over 24 hours the centre can be contacted, and we can direct it to the duty director, who's always on 24-hour call.
Can we just look at a couple of emails, please? Because I think some of this all started in April of 2017.
Yep.
If we go to GDW 000003 at page 18 to begin with. Page 18. And at the top, there's an email from you to James Wilson.
Yes.
You having to reschedule a meeting, but then you say, in regards to attendance, this meeting is to discuss an MOU, that's a memorandum of understanding, with yourselves and a number of local issues that involve your staff support. And I don't feel it appropriate to involve other organisations at this point. You can, of course, outside of this, speak with Avid. Who were Avid?
I believe they were a similar organisation to Gatwick Welfare Group.
All right, and they can offer you some advice.
And I think there was a person, there was all of the correspondence around this, and I think it was somebody called Ali.
Right. And wasn't it, maybe my memory is wrong, didn't Mr. Wilson want to bring Ali into this repeat interview with
He did,
the resident?
yes, that's correct.
And that was something that you didn't allow?
I didn't refuse it, so I contacted the on-site Home Office team.
Yeah.
And said that James had contacted me. He wishes this person to come in from this organisation, because ultimately any visitor that comes into the centre has to be approved by the Home Office. They wouldn't give me a decision. They advised me to write to what they call DES, which is Detention, Escort and Security. So I wrote to them, and the response I got back was no.
So it was a Home Office decision.
It was a Home Office decision. It was not my decision.
If we go on to page 29, time moves on. It's the 12th of June, and Mr. Wilson is writing to you and others about a meeting that you had. And in the final paragraph, finally, for now, I was grateful to Steve for raising the concern about our implying the provision of counselling. We're sorry we weren't able to finish this conversation. If you feel that we had somehow stepped over a line of what is acceptable, please let me know. We're not counsellors and are clear that we're not providing a therapeutic or psychiatric service to detainees. However, being a listening ear, a befriender and form of emotional support for detainees who need someone to talk to is at the core of what we do. And he finishes the email in very much the same vein. But in the meantime, in August, if we go to page 32, please, at the bottom, right at the bottom, page 32, and this is something we've heard evidence about. Anna Pincus, on the 7th of August at 10 in the morning, sends an email over the page 33, to Dan Horton. I met a detainee I was concerned about last week, and in view of the symptoms of stress he is manifesting, I wonder whether you would consider moving him to Tinsley House, where the environment might give him fewer triggers for post-traumatic stress from his time of imprisonment in Turkey. Obviously, you know the case much better than I, but I'd appreciate any consideration you can give the request, particularly at a time when his stress is likely to escalate with his partner being about to have a baby without him there. Now, did this all lead to a little unpleasantness, Mr. Skiz? Because we've heard from Anna Pincus about this particular email, leading to some discussion about it at a meeting that took place between you and I think Mr. Wilson and others on the 18th of August of that same year. Because if we go to what she had to tell us, and we can put up on screen INQ 000105, page 12. This is a transcript of her evidence on the 9th of December, right at the bottom, on page 46. And counsel asked her about the very email that I've been asking you about, and I'm not going to take you through all of the text. But at the bottom of page 48 on the right-hand side, you see at line 13, she was asked, you say in your statement, so counsel is asking Anna Pincus about her statement, that this email from you was discussed during a meeting on the 18th of August, and that Steve Skitt complained that your email was an example of a concern raised to the right person but in the wrong way, because it wasn't fit for you to diagnose a risk of PTSD or to request the move. Is that right? And she answered, that's right. So, I mean, first of all, I'd actually attended training on PTSD, which you mentioned at the beginning. But second of all, if I was expressing something inappropriately, that wasn't the point. The point was his concern should have been directed at how well the detained person was, and to focus on the tone of my email rather than the issue. To the next page at the top. Of the well-being of the detained person seemed to me illustrates that it was a broken culture. Were you aware of her criticisms, Mr. Skitt?
When I've read the issues.
Yeah. And she wasn't the only one. Mr. Wilson, and I'm not going to go through it all because I'm afraid it would take far too long, but Mr. Wilson, for his part in the course of his evidence, and you will have read large tracts of what he says, including some of the aspects of the relationship between you you've been telling us about, that he regarded you as hostile. I mean, we can look at it if you wish. It's INQ 000104. Page 22. And here at the bottom on page 86 of this particular transcript page, at line 6, he was being asked about what he had said to Verita in interviews with them on the 24th of October of 2017. And he was asked to look at notes of what he had to say. And towards the bottom, at line 17, difficult relationship with G4S, meets them quarterly. G4S are defensive and suspicious, want to restrict their role, happy with them doing non-controversial practical tasks, suspicious of casework, top of the next page. G4S don't like them referring cases to others, meets Steve Skitt, Dan Horton, Paul Gasson. G4S feel openly threatened. Don't want them or you contacting IMB HO caseworker struck by level of hostility. And counsel asked, I presume that's from you, included Ben Saunders. Is that saying that the hostility included hostility from Ben Saunders? Yes, although certainly you felt that was also, I think I only met with Ben Saunders on that one occasion relatively early in post. But he echoed very much the concerns I'd heard before and since. And if we go a little further to the bottom of that right-hand side of the page, at line 3 on page 88, we see at the bottom, and counsel was still asking about this note, incidents. Where does BBC programme fit in JW's experience? So that is the question Verita were asking James Wilson, which counsel was asking Mr. Wilson about. Can't place it, shocked him, but had heard rumours, can't compare it over time, and he was asked about that. And then line 17, the note continued, GDWG have good relations with some officers, know that they are caring, no notice removal adds to anxiety. Paul Gasson, hostile. Steve Skitt was helpful and now less so. Become more hostile. Don't refer to other agencies. Not a glowing report of the relationship between G4S and Gatwick Detainees Welfare Group, is it?
I accept Mr. Wilson's comments and opinions. Sat here, I can only say if I come across as hostile, then that's probably wrong in his opinion. And if he'd have raised it with me, we would have discussed it. There were a kind of number of concerns. I think in some respects, a lot of the information that was fed back to Gatwick Welfare Group, I was the messenger. I didn't always make decisions on what they could or couldn't do. There were concerns I've highlighted about how we refer concerns to us so we can deal with them appropriately. There were also concerns raised to me by the IMB that they felt uncomfortable as an independent board that their requests are going to them for details. That was something they raised to me. I raised it with James. Now, whichever way he took that, I can't kind of say that, but that is just a concern that's raised to me. I'm raising it with them and about how to refer people through. On the whole, I think most of the correspondence James returned to me, or certainly some of the correspondence was, it felt to me from his comments that it was a positive relationship, thanking me for my support and that. I think even to the extent of, why was I asked to represent Gatwick Welfare Group in their rebidding process through I believe it was through the lottery funding. They asked me if I would be willing to be interviewed by the person who was putting together that bid to support their services. I stated from the outset that I felt that their services were invaluable in regards to residents, for social care, for signposting, for any destitute clothing that would be available. We'd put in a number of processes that were new. One was around if Gatwick Welfare Group wanted to give somebody some money, I agreed if that needed to happen quickly, then we, G4S, would pay for that there and then subsequently allow Gatwick Welfare Group to refund that money to us. So a person who had no money and they wished to provide some funding, we could do that quite quickly. We also did some work around the visit room, particularly one of their advocates wanted to introduce some support for children who were visiting with their parents, and I think it was kind of colouring books, and just kind of play activities to support children who, we know what children are like. They want to get out and do things rather than sit still. So, that's Mr. Wilson's opinion. I accept that. And if he felt I was being hostile, then I apologise for that. But on the whole, I thought we had a fairly good, well, really reasonable relationship that was positive for the outcomes of residents.
Yeah, unhappily, as you appreciate, it's not quite the way that he saw it.
Yeah.
Have we got up, is it INQ 00104? Yeah. If we can please go to page 15. And towards the top on the right-hand side, just let me show you some other things he said. And I think here he's still talking about what happened at this meeting. At the top, I think I was being polite and diplomatic. I did appreciate them raising concerns and discussing them. And then he was asked about what he said to the inquiry in a witness statement. At line 11 and 12, you described Mr. Gasson and Mr. Skitt as having taken a highly combative and distrustful approach at the meeting. And then if we roll it down a bit more to the bottom quadrant, page 60, you describe in your inquiry statement, repeated just now, that the approach to GDWG was increasingly becoming one that was tantamount to bullying. Asked why he said it, that was a dynamic that I felt was increasing there. I was particularly vividly aware of that in the meeting, the dynamic. I can remember the meeting very vividly. I remember it was Steve Skitt and Paul Gasson who were in the meeting. They were nearest the door. I was on my own, very, very agitated. I felt they were toying with me, threatening with something, a very immediate threat to our access. Dark, rainy day. Remember walking out of the meeting, centre feeling shaken by the meeting. I'd had meetings before where they'd been difficult, but I was really shaken by the meeting. Do you recognise that?
We had there were a couple of meetings that we had where that were challenging in regards to what was being asked, and I think the meeting we talked about, if I recall rightly, we talked about some of the concerns reference the advocates. I wouldn't say I'd have been threatening. I may talk direct, I may talk straight, but I wouldn't consider myself as a threatening person, particularly in a meeting with the Home Office, who was my customer.
Yeah. Well, he's accusing not just you, but Paul Gasson, who was the Home Office manager.
Yeah.
And finally, in this regard, and we can put this up on screen very quickly, please, his reaction to what had happened is also captured, and I'm asked to put this to you by DPG, Dayton Pierce Glynn, DPG 000002 at page 57. It's a witness statement that Anna Pincus made at page 57, paragraph 162. Page 57. And in paragraph 162, this is Anna Pincus talking about the meeting of the 18th of August with G4S and the Home Office. James sent an email that day to GDWG staff team saying, quote, I just had a pretty grueling meeting with Brook management. The continuation of the drop-ins is on something of a knife edge. For the time being, if you're considering raising any concerns with G4S, including healthcare, or with any of the agencies that work within Brook or Tinsley House, please let me know and we can discuss. I've offered to make any necessary contacts for the next few weeks. In other words, please make sure any concerns raised going through me. I realise this sounds quite draconian, but it's a serious situation. End quote.
I think out of all of this, the only aim that I had was around, and I think when I had the meeting, well, one meeting with James, we talked about some of the of his staff that I'd heard were kind of reported as perhaps being outside their remit in regards to what they were doing, and I raised that with James, and he appeared to take that on board. He wasn't aware of those issues, and he said he would go back and have a look at that. But I think that the main crux of this, and this is, you know, the conversations were all the aim of the meetings were around how we refer and how we kind of put information to the right people, because if you miss something, there are inherent dangers, particularly about mental health or safety. If you kind of send an email, you visit somebody on a Friday afternoon and you don't send it to the right person, somebody may not pick it up till Monday because they may not be on that weekend. And this is just all about reporting to the right person, or some of it is. And we, as either duty director or myself if I'm on duty, we can kind of signpost very quickly to deal with the issue. And I think there were some very good examples of some of the, you know, if you were to look into a lot of the emails that had subsequently gone through, and even at the time there was a lot of good work achieved by that information getting to the right person or the right people in a timely fashion.
Yeah. All well and good, Mr. Skip. Let's put that to one side. But when you're dealing with other people like GDWG and somebody like James Wilson, who you clearly respected, yes?
Yep.
And when he's saying things like bullying, tantamount to bullying, felt threatened, grueling meeting, then perhaps the relationship you're describing isn't the one that he thought he was having.
Yeah, I accept it's worrying if people are, you know, feel, I mean, whether this was aimed at me in particular or is it aimed at Paul, I don't know. You know, I'm not a maverick in kind of saying, yes, you can do this or no, you can't. You know, a lot of the decision making around what people could or couldn't do within the centre went through another authority. Yep. You know, it wouldn't necessarily be me that was making the decision, you know, as we've clearly kind of identified here in some of the previous cases. You know, sometimes I'm the messenger. Okay,
let's move on. A little earlier, do you remember I was asking about the differences between the custodial environment and detention? And you started telling us about the physical layout.
Yeah.
I know you're still there now, so you may be biased, of course, Mr. Skid, but being as objective as you can, do you think that Brook House is a fit and proper place to hold detained men for purely administrative reasons?
Very difficult as the supplier.
It was intended to be a difficult question, but it's one, you know, with your experience, we value your opinion. And I know you work for Serco, I know it's your bread and butter, and you've been there many years. But
it's an area where I work. I work for an organisation that has a customer to the Home Office. It is the building that we have contracted to supply services for our customer. Yeah. And we operate on behalf of the customer. Yeah. If it's yes, it is a prison-like building, but the condition of the building is I believe, in good condition. It is clean. The rooms are of a nature which is a suitable place for somebody to live. We are trying to make enhancements as we speak to try and soften the look within the centre. So I would say yes.
You think it's fit and proper?
Yes. In regards to the kind of condition.
Yeah.
I mean, you could debate. You know, it is a prison building, and I know it is something that HMIP on all their inspections will criticise.
Yeah.
Most prison buildings that I've worked in.
Let me perhaps put the question in a slightly different way. Do you think it was a mistake to have built a building to the specification of a category prison for this population of men?
I think you have to look at, and I'm no expert on this, so please bear with me. I think the building was originally designed as a very short-term removal centre.
Well, that's what I'm coming to.
Mm.
And therein lies the rub of it, because built as a short-term holding centre, it might just about have been manageable for most people for 72 hours. I could take you to one of the survey questions in the HMIP report that we looked at not very long ago, which gives a breakdown of the amount of time that men had been there. More than 1 month, less than 3 months, 28% of men. More than 3 months, less than 6 months, 18%. More than 6, less than 9, 10%. More than 9, less than 12, 6. More than 12 months, 5. And we've had examples of others there apparently far longer.
Yep.
Now, it's all fine and dandy putting men like this in a building designed for short-term holding. But some of these men were spending the equivalent of substantial sentences of imprisonment, weren't they?
The timescales of some of the residents that had previously been at Brook was considerate, and I think I remember talking to one gentleman who I think had been there nearly 2 years. Who all the staff knew.
Well, if you're there 2 years, it's the equivalent of a 4-year sentence.
Yeah, and and I think he'd been in previous detention centres. Now, however, the casework and the reasons why an individual's there, I have no kind of say.
No, but the point, Mr. Skitt, is that's not what it was designed to do.
My understanding is it was originally opened as a short-term. That's my opinion. I mean, I stand to be corrected, but that's what I understand.
And so you started out with a man count of something like 426. I think 22 beds were added in 2013. Before you were there. Yeah. And come 2017, with effect from the 1st of April, there had been an agreement to add 60 more beds, which you know about. Was that a great idea?
It was a directive from the Home Office that they wanted to put the extra beds in.
Was it a great idea, Mr.
Sorry?
Skitt? Was it a great idea?
I think at the time it was a reasonable idea.
You said it was controversial in your witness statement.
Well, the controversy, this is about one person, isn't it? In a room.
Well, you tell us.
So, this is my personal view. It has always been my personal view since I've probably been in the prison service, and it is my personal view. I accept where I work, and I have to accept that the requirement is part of the contract, whether it's in a prison or a IRC. There's more than one person in the room. But my personal view is that we should have all custodial sites should be single rooms. That is just my personal view.
Yeah. Mr. Skitt, it's not just me. I think my hearing's going, and maybe it is, but that's not going to be the same with everybody else. And I'm told, can you keep your voice up?
I'm sorry.
You speak very softly.
I think I'm going to poke my eyes out with these.
No, you won't. Don't worry. I've not done it myself yet. But you are what you are. But can you please keep your voice up?
Yes.
All right,
sorry. My
you.
apologies, everybody. Just put your hand up if I can't hear me.
Yeah, I'll tell you. But paragraph 85 of your statement, you don't have to look at it. You say the beds were a controversial addition. But with the beds came extra funding and staffing to manage additional capacity. So that's what I really was asking you about.
Oh, sorry, my apologies.
No. I mean, I know that you have said elsewhere in this statement that you had the view that you've just expressed, but what I'm asking you is why you said the beds were a controversial addition. What was controversial?
There were, well, I say controversial. There were a topic of discussion, whether people should, whether people shouldn't. I know Stephen Shaw had a view. I know members within the SMT had raised, a kind of 3 beds. It was something as an organisation we had to look at. There were it's not our accommodation, it is a Home Office building. We were asked to put together a kind of plan in regards to profiling, extra staffing, look at what extra regimes we could put in place. We put the plan together and submitted that to the Home Office, and the extra beds project was then driven forward. I think appropriate risk assessments taken place into the rooms in regards to air conditioning. I forget what it's called now. There is a test you do, certainly on the lighting. There's a specific word for it. There is a DSO, but I can't recall what it was. That everybody has the appropriate lighting. I think discussions were raised around about furniture, and I think extra furniture was also put in the rooms as well to suit 3 people. Yeah.
I mean, was it anything that G4S could have put its foot down about and said, no, this is not happening?
I wouldn't have thought so. No, we're with providing what the customer had asked for. We put together our assessments of that and staffing levels. But ultimately, in my opinion, it would be the Home Office that would have signed that off.
Why were they needed?
Sorry?
Why were the extra beds needed?
I can't. I think around the time, and I don't quote me on dates. I think Dover had just closed or was closing.
Dover what?
Dover. There's a prison in Dover Castle.
Yeah.
That was an IRC.
Yeah.
I think that was closing, and I think it was handed back to HMPPS, I believe.
Yeah.
I think there were plans afoot in the longer term, whether the plans were there then, but certainly it happened afterwards. The Verne, which was a prison on the Portland, shut down. I mean, that was 600 spaces, I think.
Well, it was certainly open in May,
and
I can tell you with a degree of confidence it was there, the Verne, on the 13th of May, because we have evidence of a detainee D687 who was moved to the Verne on the 13th of May 2017 and tried to self-harm in a disabled lavatory rather than be taken. So that's May time. So the Verne was certainly open at that point.
Whether that was in the plans going forward, but it certainly did shut, and so did later on Morton Hall, which is another HMPPS.
We've heard of Morton Hall. That's Lincolnshire.
Lincolnshire, yeah.
So 60 beds added, put in at cost. G4S gets extra funding.
Yep.
Yes, and G4S, I mean, it's not just the beds, it's other fixtures and fittings have to come in to accommodate 60 more men at full capacity. And we'll look, not with you, but with Mr. Petherick, I hope, at some of the costings of this. You say in your statement, I remember Andrew Mitchell was all for the additional beds. Andrew Mitchell who? MP. Minister at the time?
I'm not sure if he was a minister at the time, but he came down to... I'm not sure why he came down, to be honest. I don't know whether it was on behalf of...
But came to have a look, did he?
Yeah, come to have a look.
And was all for it. And as you say, Stephen Shaw reported in January 2016 that it shouldn't go ahead. And in July 2018, when he did his follow-up report, his recommendation was that where extra beds had already been put in and Brook House was one of the IRCs, they should be removed. Yeah. And they were removed.
They were removed, yeah.
As a result of Stephen Shaw?
That's my understanding, yeah.
Yeah. So all of the cost of putting them in, they had to be taken out again because of Stephen Shaw's views. In the meantime, because they were supposed to take effect on or about the 1st of April, we can look at the service provider form or the notice of change, but it was due to have effect from the 1st of April, the 60 beds of 2017. Were they used, in fact?
Yes, they were.
So we've heard differing evidence about this. We've heard hardly used, not used. What's your recollection?
My recollection is that they were used.
Full capacity or not?
I can't recall if they were full capacity, but I think the approach we took was a kind of softly approach is perhaps the wrong phrase, but we knew there were nationalities that actually preferred to be more in a communal room.
Well, you said this to Verita, you said Chinese.
Vietnamese, Chinese, they were to be in a room. So I can't recall if we had to kind of say to somebody, you are going in a room, but we did try and adopt an approach that was sensible, I think, and logical, and say, you know, do you mind, or do you want to, if you've got a few friends? Which I guess, you know, on the other hand, we had Tinsley up the road, which was, as you may be aware, is full of dormitory accommodation.
Can we just put up very quickly CJS 000582? And here we are, we have some SMT meeting notes. This is the 13th of April, so it's around 2 weeks after the beds have apparently gone in. And if we go to the second page, please. I'm going to have to find it in my own notes. If you can remember. Yeah, it's just under departmental updates, Brook House Residential JW, and JW being Jules Williams. Yeah? Skid?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Unsettled across the wings, a few assaults and boisterous behaviour. There has been no impact with additions beds. And was that the case, that there had been no impact? I mean, this is only 2 weeks in, so it's not...
No, as I think if I recall, we did trade. Well, I think we took a sensible approach into starting this off. So I think the people that were in the 3 bedded rooms were people that were happy to be in there, so that it hadn't been a particular problem. Some wanted to share, some didn't. That could probably be fairly early in a reasonable reflection on that.
And if we look at, I don't invite you to, but I'll read it for the record, paragraph 235, page 67 of your witness statement. You say, I was involved in some staffing plans, particularly the one I can recall was surrounding the extra 60 beds that were put in place. I was also involved with working with the then director and others, and I can recall that everyone who was involved in this process at the time considered the plan and agreed the staffing levels would be deemed appropriate. Now, I want to be clear about what you're saying there.
So
just a minute, let me ask the question. Did you take on more staff for the 60 additional beds, or did you maintain the status quo?
No. I think more staff were recruited.
How many?
I think, without looking at the document, I think it was an odd number. I think just under 20. I think about 20 or just under.
Was that in anticipation of the beds coming in, or around the 1st of April, or after?
It was part of the process and mobilisation towards the extra beds coming in.
Yeah. And the imam, you'll remember him,
Yep.
Mr. Khayyam, he spoke to Verita on the 1st of December. And can we just put up on screen, please, VER 000230. At page 11. And we can see at question 133, Miss Lampard is asking him what happened when there was the additional, when they added the 60, it became worse. Were there some more staff that were put in? Yes. G4S are involved quite heavily in recruiting at the moment. And bearing in mind this interview is taking place in December 2017. Again, I'm also involved in recruitment days, so I attend assessment days, and he was saying, In the last 2 months, I've attended, let's say, 6 or 7 assessment days, which is very rare for G4S to have. Since January 2016 until just 2 or 3 months ago, I'd attended about 3 assessment days. Over the last 2 months, I've attended 6 or 7. And bearing in mind, as I say, the date of this interview is the 1st of December, he's talking about the autumn of 2017, of course, after the Panorama programme. Mr. Marsden asks, there's been a sudden spike in recruitment. Yes, so they're recruiting quite heavily, and I've seen that change since Lee Hanford has come into position. And Miss Lampard wants to pin him down, but staffing levels before the 60 were pretty awful. And it got worse after the 60, or do you think it got better? It got worse. But now they've picked up again because we're recruiting quite heavily and new members of staff are coming in. Putting in those 60 made a bad situation pretty much worse at first. So his recollection, and given he was involved in recruitment by the sound of it, is that there weren't new staff.
Without going back and tracking back into the recruitment of staff going back some time, we did go through periods where we found recruitment of staff very difficult generally.
Well, that's a bit different to what you were telling us earlier, Mr. Skip, because in your mind, new staff were taken on. You said about 20 to cater for the additional beds. That's what I understood you
No,
to
but
be
what I'm
telling
saying
us.
is I can't go back and track
No,
whether that was for the, that may be not for the extra 20 beds. That may just a general.
60 beds.
Oh, sorry, 60 beds. That
Yeah.
may be just general recruitment,
Right.
not just specifically. I mean, I'm just reading into that. Does Zisham think that was particularly around the beds, or was that recruitment in general?
Yeah.
And I know there were some challenging times with recruitment. I think there always is in an area that where the centre is, because there is a lot of opportunity and a lot of employment in the area, given the fact that we're next door to Gatwick Airport and all the kind of support services that support the airport in general. So recruitment is a challenging process.
So what you mean is, in a competition of where would I like to work, Brook House isn't going to be at the top of the list in Gatwick.
I don't know, you'd have to ask people.
Well, I'm asking you. You work there.
I don't know. I work there. I enjoy working there. So that's my opinion.
All right. Chair, 3:15. Can I suggest a cause of an outbreak?
Indeed, thank you. See you at 3:30. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Mr. Rodman.
Chair, Miss Blackwell asked me very nicely at the break if I would just put up one of the emails, which I referred to earlier, just to ask Mr. Skid a couple more questions, so I shall do that.
Of course, thank you.
Thank you. If we go to page 41, which is up on screen, this is the email or letter I sent you, I put to you earlier, dated the 25th of September. And I'm asked to read out the first paragraph, which says, I think it's this one, thank you for taking the time to meet with me last month. This letter sets out some of the information you and Paul requested during our discussions and contains some suggestions for the efficient management of our future meetings. And it's quite a lengthy document. And if we go to the bitter end on page 44, please. At the top, finally, says Mr. Wilson, to end on a positive note, I was really encouraged to hear you say at the meeting that you felt that in 99.9% of cases that GDWG was doing good work. I hope that with a continuance of the dialogue between us that we can work usefully together. So that's just to set a balance of some of the other things he said in the letter, and I hope that suffices. Yeah. Right, moving on. Can I ask you a couple of things about something we've already touched on, Mr. Skid, which is drugs. Can we put up on screen CJS 000555, please? And here is another SMT meeting minute, this one of the 9th of February. If we go to the foot of the page, sorry, page 2, under Deputy Director, with your initials, security picking up on trends that there has been a massive turnaround in the dynamics of the centre, different types of intelligence, especially around corruption. A number of staff feel that it is colleagues bringing in some of the prohibited items. A number of staff in visits need to be challenged. You remember I asked you a little earlier about how you're working tirelessly to prevent the ingress of drugs. Here we are in February 2017. Clearly security was informing you and the rest of the SMT that there'd been a massive turnaround in the dynamics. Which way round had the turnaround gone in February? Did it mean more drugs were coming in or less?
I can't. Yeah, I can't recall if it would be up or down. The dynamics normally in these cases would be that you'd have a number of what we would call prominent nominals. Yep. Involved in the drug subculture that may have gone, or we may have had more turn up. I don't know, is the honest answer.
Paul Gasson was asked about this issue in his Verita interview, VER 000256 at page 19. Page 21, sorry, page 21. And he was asked, you can see if we expand halfway down at question 309. He was asked about new psychoactive substances and what it could do. And in that long answer, he said, I asked for staff searches. It took me a while, and to be frank, it was fobbed off. The only staff searches I had was new ITC staff. Who are ITC staff? The training staff?
So that would be the new staff that would join.
Yeah, is that those on the training course?
Yes.
So everyone on day one of the ITC apparently gets searched, so that's good. However, they're not going into the centre, so it's not contractual. everyone needs to be searched over time as part of the staff searching plan if they're going into the centre. Off the back of that, they wrote a new staff searching policy and they declared that they'd failed to search their staff. And he was asked to confirm that. Question, that was early 16. I'm sure I have all mitigation tables and comments. On the shared drive, shared folders, the staff searching did then increase. It happened once or twice going in, and since Panorama, there's been a high number of staff searches. Question, during 2017, you think they might have done it twice, or during early 16 and 17 they did it twice? Yes. Question, twice in the whole of the 16-17 period. I'm not sure about 2015, but 2016, yes. It was probably only once each year as a question. I couldn't speculate, but I can find out. G4S would have those records. Did you agree with what he told Verita?
There were some particular issues at one point. I know the inquiry has heard concerns around staff resources, and it is a difficult staff resource to do, and it's also extremely difficult to within those confines to have a number of staff to do staff searching. Those are some of the difficulties. The other issue is, yes, we failed in that.
Yeah.
But from a personal experience in regards to staff searching for drugs, I'm not personally a keen fan on routine searching, because staff understand what routine searching is, and it's usually set at different times of the day. I personally would like to work through intelligence, and if I need to do a search on somebody, I can try and target that search. That would be my approach personally, but I wasn't head of security at the time, so.
Yeah. Fine, so you agree that when Gasson said it failed, it did fail. Can we look at another document, please? IMB 000015 at page 1. It's another IMB meeting report. And if we go to item 4, this being the 15th of March 2017, item 4, SS for G4S. HMIP report was published last week with positive remarks for Brook. There has been some good work in reducing the flow of NPS into the centre, especially through visits. The report is the one that I've been asking you about. Yeah. What was the good work?
I can't recall exactly, but within visits, it was an area that we were concerned was potentially a main ingress point. There was at some point quite a number of good finds, what you would call, within the visits team, and potential stopping of passes.
Yeah.
I think, if I recall, I may not be correct, so there were also a number of prosecutions around that as well.
Right. And then CJS 000915, please. We'll find that to be another minute, but this time of a security meeting, which you attended on the 11th of April. And if we look, scroll up if you would, Zainab, you can just about make out under safeguarding MB, that's Michelle Brown, the second entry up from the bottom of that particular entry. UKBA drug dogs will be using BH and TH as a training centre from the 4th of May.
That's correct, yeah.
What did that mean?
So we had attempted to procure dogs from some of our prisons because some of the prisons do have a resource of dogs. We found it very difficult because at this particular time a lot of prisons were going through a similar kind of issue around NPS. We looked at, we paid for another part of the business within G4S to bring dogs in. I think they would have been perhaps passive, active, dogs that were maybe used at, I think, like sports events and other places. They weren't used to work in an environmental custodial environment. Then Michelle, who mentioned that she'd got a contact with the UKBA at the airport, who was responsible for the drug dogs, which they would, I guess, use in the airport and at the ports. And I know from personal experience that dog handlers, when they're training dogs, do like to use other environments for their dogs so they don't get stale, they get different environments. So we agreed that they would come to Brook. For them, it would be training, a different centre. Didn't change the fact that the dogs would indicate or not. And they came in and did some searches for us as well. Well, we did full staff searches and they assisted us with the dogs.
Let me ask you something else that you were asked about for the purposes of your witness statement. You'll remember two officers that were involved in disciplinary matters, Babs Fagbo, Babatunde, and Shane Munro.
Yes.
Were you involved in their disciplinary issues?
I was involved in the final part of it, which had been disciplinary hearing.
Yeah. And did that relate to their inappropriate behaviour in regards to a particular detainee, or were there any drugs issues around either of the pair of
It was
them?
two separate incidents.
Yeah, in April.
Yeah.
Where one, Shane Munro, on a day after Babatunde Fagbo had allegedly sworn at a detainee.
Yep.
And I think the day following, the detainee had heard a discussion taking place about that incident.
Yes, I think that's my recollection.
When Shane Munro allegedly became involved and had also sworn at the detainee D119, if my memory serves me.
Yeah.
And in due course, you had to deal with the pair of them, and because of that, they were both dismissed in very short.
The instances happened in quick succession, like
Yes.
I say, one day after the other. So I think by the time the investigation had been commissioned, and by the time the investigations would have been returned, I can't remember the exact date, but I would, it probably would have been within.
Yeah. So that we're clear, as far as they're concerned, your recollection, was it simply that inappropriate behaviour by the pair of them?
It was a bit more than inappropriate behaviour. So, in regards to the first one, and I think my letter and the notes from the meeting kind of outline in detail my findings of the hearing and my thought processes in coming to my decision.
Yep. But both have given evidence, and I need to ask you about this, Mr. Skip. Both have given evidence and said that their dismissal by you was related to their race. What do you say about that?
Do not agree whatsoever.
That they were treated unfairly because they're both black?
No. They were treated in line with what was presented to me at the disciplinary hearing.
Yeah. Now, can I ask you, please, about Ben Saunders? You'll remember that you had an interview with Verita yourself.
Yes.
And can we just look at the interview? It's VER000248. And Chair, you have this one in full at tab 99 if you wish to make a note. At page 10, please. And it's the 27th of November 2017, your interview. And if we look at question 113, you were asked about him and his style at 111. Ben had been here a couple of years by the time I came in. Decent, good bloke. completely different backgrounds. And you were asked, in effect, what his background was. At 114, you say he's a social worker, and it would probably be fair to say operationally we wouldn't have the same views of doing things. I did call him Ben the politician once, and you were asked if he was facilitative, and you said yes, he was more of a thinker than a doer, and there were some things that we probably didn't agree on. There were some things that I felt would have perhaps needed to be taken forward in a different way. I was quite talkative with him about the SMT and my views, and effectively that he should take more control and direction as to what the SMT does. And you expand in that particular answer. Question: Ben wasn't a builder of a team, not in my opinion. And over the next page, was he the kind of person who'd walk around the place? Would he go out and walk down the visits and find out what's going on here? Not on a regular basis. Did you do that? I'll go round every day if I can, if time prevails. He had a social work background.
Yep.
Yeah, he'd been at Medway Secure Training Centre from between 2002 and 2012 before he was appointed Centre Director of Brook House under G4S. And then he was parachuted back into Medway after the Panorama expose and the Medway report on Medway, which, if my memory serves me, was the 30th of March 2016. And he stayed at Medway till about the summer of 2016 when he came back to Brook House. Does that all accord with your recollection?
I can't remember the exact date, but yeah, that's...
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you think he was suited to being a centre director? He'd had a background in social work. He'd been at Medway for a decade before coming over to Brook House as centre director, and then he went back to try and, I think, inject a little stability after Medway, which is very similar to what you were asked to do when you came over to Brook House. Do you think he was suited to being centre director?
I'm not sure whether it's my place to say whether it was or it wasn't.
Well, it is, Mr. Stop there. It is, because
Okay.
I'm asking you, so we want your opinion.
Okay, so I think my opinion is that I'm not sure the details of all the issues that had taken place before I arrived. It had clearly affected a number of people within the SMT. I think what lacked within the SMT at that particular time, yeah, and I sit here and take responsibility for some things. I accept that. Is direction of an SMT and pulling that together.
So, nice bloke, but lousy centre director?
I would say lacked some skills in what I'd be used to in a governor or a director.
Which were?
Being directive and taking, not control, that's not the wrong word, not the right word, but management of the SMT would have been the areas.
I mean, in saying that, are you saying that part of what you called this long-established grievance culture was also what he had not got a grip of?
I think, my personal opinion, I think if that hadn't taken place, and, you know, there are people that can be quite directive, governors and directors, there are people that can work in different ways, and I believe that if those some of those elements hadn't have been in place and hadn't happened before, and you got an SMT that hadn't gone through those issues previously, I think, you know, Ben Starr could work with an SMT without those kind of caveats.
So, coming back to what I asked you much earlier, the grievance culture that still persisted and pervaded at Brook House did affect the job that he was able to do.
in summary, yes,
Yeah.
in my opinion.
Still in this interview that you gave to Verita, please, going back to page 6. And there's a very long answer at 68. We can scroll up, Zainab, please. And if you can just pick up probably about 10 lines down. When I came here, I found a lot of the first-line managers, from what I was used to, certainly in prisons, were managers. Do you see that line? It's about 10 lines down. If you're leading in from the left margin, you're looking for the word managers.
Yes.
That's it.
Yeah.
When I came here, I found a lot of the first-line managers, from what I was used to, certainly in prisons, were managers. What do you mean by first-line managers?
The DCM grade.
Yeah. There'd be an expectation that I would expect a first-line manager to be able to manage the sickness. As an example, when somebody went sick, to make other contacts, do the paperwork. I just felt I had to micromanage things like that. Have you done this? Have you done that? A lot of my time seemed to be spent, and still does in some respects, having to talk to managers week in, week out. Have you made contact with your sick? Have you done this? Have you done that? Things that in a previous life I'd have expected the other way round. I would probably view it as managed from top down rather than from bottom up. So here you're complaining about what, DCMs?
Yes.
Not SMT members, but
No.
DCMs.
I think when you look at the kind of concern I'm kind of highlighting, I think I think I'm not sure if they did it weekly. We used to chair a sick meeting.
Speak up,
Sorry,
speak up, Mr.
do
Skip.
apologise.
Yeah.
I'll move these in. I used to chair I think it was weekly, like a sick meeting, just to run through
What's a sick meeting?
for all those staff that were absent. So we'd have
Well, you don't have a meeting with the absent staff.
no, but we had a meeting with the managers to discuss the absent staff.
Who's absent? Right,
Yeah.
okay, yeah.
And I think some of the concerns were there are some areas that have to be covered initially when the member of staff goes sick, and you know, quite right, you know, and that's an initial contact from a manager just to say, notice you've gone sick, how you doing, what's wrong, anything, you know, and do we need to put any support in place for those members of staff? And I think there was also some criticism along the line from staff as well, who were saying, well, I've been off sick, I was perhaps injured at work, or I've not been feeling too well, who hadn't had that contact, who would kind of complain about that as well. So it was just trying to instill, and I do appreciate that there were times when that particular grade was pulled and pushed to do various bits, but just the bit I was trying to install in, you know, if everybody just kind of sat there for 5-10 minutes in the morning, just took 5 minutes, who's gone sick in your area, just give them a ring, check in with them, see if they're okay, you know, just kind of really basic questions that then we know where we are with people, rather than leave it and then staff feel annoyed that nobody's taken the time just to give them a ring.
And did you feel micromanagement was your lot only in
No,
these
I think
wait, I haven't
Sorry, I do apologise.
Mr. Skip. Only in relation to sicknesses, or did you find yourself micromanaging DCMs in all other sorts of ways?
No, I think sickness was. I mean, in relation, I think sickness was one of the concerns. I said because I think I'm not sure at the time if there'd been concerns raised by staff who had been off due to lack of contact. That might have just been one example I was talking about. I wouldn't say I'd be having to micromanage everything. I just felt that was one of the areas that I felt we were letting ourselves down.
All right. Let me ask you something else now. We can take that down, Zainab. Thank you. In your statement, page 47, paragraph 158. Page 47. You were asked about your views of the Home Office. I don't see within the Home Office what I saw in a previous life working at prisons, guidance and direction. When I worked in the prison service, there was always guidance and yearly plans about how it operates. We're working on this at the IRC now by looking at positive detention culture. But still, you don't have that corporate vision from the Home Office, in my opinion. The Home Office's aim in relation to Gatwick IRC is to move people out of the country. And that is basically it. There is no vision about progression over the next 5 or so years. Because of this, it's also likely that no one in the SMT would have vision, and more likely that they would just follow the status quo without challenging it. Now, first of all, when you say we are working on this at the IRC now by looking at positive detention culture, your witness statement, of course, was made and signed off, if my memory serves me, on the 4th of March. What's the positive detention culture that you are invoking under Serco?
It's Dr. Victoria Lavis, and she.
Dr.
Victoria Lavis. I'm not sure if she's coming to give.
Not that I know about.
Okay.
Would you just tell us shortly, Mr. Skiss, about her?
So this was introduced when, as part of the new contract. You know, it is to work with basically all staffing groups. It is basically we look at areas of concern. We have looked at staff surveys and had numerous meetings to kind of make a kind of plan and roadmap for Gatwick RC going forward, and how we can address that, have the staff involved, also each function. So I have my own kind of roadmap that has a number of elements within it. As an example, part of my area is the care team. So how the care team operates in supporting staff, and other areas very similar, and whether that involves training or specific areas within the centre. We've set this out, and I'm no expert on this, but it's been rolled out with engagement from all staff within the centre, so we're all understanding of what it is and how we're going to work going forward. It is a report. Reports are published based on our functions that are involved in the Home Office, just so we can understand what the culture is, that we get it right, and that all staff are engaged within that process.
And what's her expertise?
Sorry?
What's her expertise, Dr. Ladis?
I mean, I know she was from a psychology background. I'm not sure exactly what a doctorship is in.
Does it follow that Serco is now invoking a positive detention culture that during the time we're talking about it was pretty negative?
We didn't have such a
No.
process in place.
No. So you're saying Serco is trying to improve new initiatives in place to make it a better place than it was?
And I think it's something the customer wanted. So the part of the kind of specification was the customer would want this.
You remember having an interview with Dr. Aitken back in July 2017?
I know I was interviewed by Dr. Aitken, yes, I can't...
we could look at it if needs be, but you were asked about the Home Office, and you say, I think if we go back to purpose, vision, strategy, I'm not sure the general public understand what we do anyway. I think those that would form an uneducated view would perhaps view it as a good thing. You say, I think each IRC is independent. All they want to do if they've got a problem is dump it onto someone else, would be my view. We fall foul of that with a lot of removals that come into here, and I think the purpose, the vision, needs to be working all as one, because we're all doing the same job, And I think we make it harder for each other by the processes at the moment. And I'm asked to ask you this on behalf of Dayton Pierce Glynn. Did you consider that the lack of institutional purpose or the perceived lack of purpose or direction of Brook House contributed to the culture that developed there?
Sorry, I don't quite understand.
Did you consider that the lack of purpose, this is what you're saying, the Home Office had no vision for this place?
And I think no, this was about moves, wasn't it?
Well, it was about...
Moves from other centres.
Well, I'm simply quoting what you had to say. It's difficult to tell because the questions
No, I'm
aren't
just
there.
trying to summarise from what you have
Yeah.
said about my words of dumping from other
Yeah.
centres. I think this was around the movement of residents
Right.
around the centres where if there was a particular problematic individual in another centre, I think they may have been moved around to other centres as a general transfer rather than a problematic move. And I think if we take this forward, there was some work done because we put in place at Gatwick a Detained of Interest meeting, which is a weekly meeting about residents that were of concern for various reasons. And I think also the Home Office put into place an excessive disruptive behaviours policy where all IRCs that would want to consider to move somebody for a variety of reasons would submit their requests, and they would be either agreed or not agreed at a fairly high level. I think it was Alan Gibson who initially started to chair these meetings.
Yeah.
I think there was just concerns around not just people who were being disruptive, but there may have been people that had other vulnerabilities, etc. That I felt were being moved around would turn up at Brook House and be a specific problem that we're not aware of. I think it's I will. I think most people will accept anybody into Brook House, whoever. But I think sometimes forewarned is forearmed. Just kind of understand what the difficulties are.
Yeah, let's put up your interview again, please. VR 000248. I'm asked on behalf of Pat Murphy to ask you some questions about this. At page 13, at the top of the page, at line 140, you were asked about a more demanding Home Office. I don't think the policy has changed, and I think you were talking about drugs here. There's certainly more issues raised by residents around casework. I struggle to get my head around the Home Office, the way they operate. Sorry to keep going on about prisons, but if you go to a prison, it's different. It's very difficult operating centres where all you're doing is, for want of a better word, locking people up and looking after their needs. This is something you said earlier. You have no input whatsoever into their cases. You have no access to any information about their cases. In a prison you would. The offender management supervises all the work around a prisoner. It's all there, all accessed, and we deal with it. And we've already seen how in your witness statement you talked about how the Home Office failed to instill G4S with any corporate vision, given their one-track focus on effecting removal. And one of the questions I'm asked to ask you is it your view that the Home Office placed far too little, if any, value on the culture of Brook House and the care or welfare of detained persons?
No, I don't. It's not my view at all. And I think this was something that was said a number of years ago. I have to say, since this document and this report was published, and those are my views, and I've echoed those views earlier. I think there has been a significant investment by the Home Office, particularly around casework, with the detention engagement teams that are literally on site now. It has been difficult the last couple of years with COVID to kind of engage directly with people and at a level that we were engaging before, but that is now slightly changing. Now the guidance is changing, but I think whereas before there would be a small team within the centre, it's now quite a large team, and I think on reflection from what that says there to what it is now, we're in a completely different state.
Did you feel then during this period with G4S that staff were left dealing with questions that they couldn't answer?
Either questions they couldn't answer or would take some time to try and get an answer, because some caseworkers also work in isolation in other parts of the country as well. But I said, as of my last statement, that has now changed, and staff can ring up the debt teams and then get a response fairly quickly, which is helpful.
Yeah.
And they're now, as I say, as we're moving out of COVID, I know I've been engaging with senior Home Office managers around how we're going to be utilising the legal visits for their work, and also I know there's work going on with a colleague of mine that they will be going around the wings on a daily basis, holding forums, and forums is the wrong word. I think it's engagement sessions with residents to answer any questions they may have.
How did you get on with Paul Gasson?
I got on all right, Paul Gasson.
A good working relationship?
I thought so, yeah.
He ever raise any issues with you about your style of working or management?
Not to me personally.
No. I just want to put up on screen, I suspect you've seen this,
Oh, yeah.
Mr. Skid, but VER 000292 at page 54, please. It's a notebook from Verita of notes of interview, and towards the bottom you can make out some of the handwriting I can't exactly read, but it looks like concern with Steve Skid, and this was Paul Gasson's notes from Paul Gasson, interview with Verita. 30 years, it reads as from prison, doesn't get it is an IRC, no ownership of problems, and then reads on, accepts that Steve did do things, it may read, in a hierarchy, not quite sure about the next word, plus not support, plus ownership, plus development. So I've read all of that in context insofar as it goes. But he is telling Verita he had concerns with you, that you really didn't understand the distinction between the fact it was an IRC as distinct from your experience in the prison system, and that you took no ownership of problems. What do you say?
Well, I would say, obviously, that's Paul's opinion. I've never had any concerns raised to me. I would have thought if Paul had any concerns around me, he could have raised it through his line to raise it so it could be formally raised with me. I can't recall anything being raised with me.
Moving on to a few questions about staffing. Go, if you would, to your paragraph 232, your witness statement. At page 66. You say how G4S was contracted to provide 668 hours of DCO time per day, and that the contract required at least 2 DCOs on duty in each residential wing throughout the day. In terms of whether this level of staffing was adequate, you can argue it both ways. It all depends on what's going on in the centre At times, I accept that it could be very tight. However, on some days, there was more staff than the minimum contracted levels. Let me ask you this. When it was tight, was it so tight, do you think, that it was insecure?
I wouldn't say insecure would be the right word.
What is the right word?
So I think just to kind of summarise that, yes, 2 staff was the profile. Those were profiles that had been agreed as part of the contract. I think 2 staff on a wing, yes, is challenging. There is a lot of work to do, and it was a concern on most days around checking what the staffing levels were. There were concerns raised by staff. We tried to address those. We looked at a number of initiatives of utilising other staff within the centre, certainly at peak times, such as unlock times, serving of meal times, lock-up times, where we could utilise the activity staff, we could utilise other satellite areas to assist in that, because effectively once the activities started, a lot of the residents would leave the wing, which would reduce the numbers. But, you know, potentially, depending on what was going on, yes, it could have an impact on maybe what was being delivered on the wing, whereas things could be slower. Staff may not be able to do some of the things in a time, or if they could, on that particular day, and that was around prioritising what the work was.
Paragraph 233, technically having 2 DCOs on a wing where 120 residents reside could be challenging. However, I was aware of the contract levels, and so I often thought that we just had to make do with what we had.
Yep.
Make do.
Probably make do is the wrong word to...
Well, first of all, it's 2 words, and they're your words, Mr. Skid. I mean, this is a witness statement of 115 pages. It's lengthy. You looked at a lot of documents. You're still at Serco, working for working for Brook House, so you know you're not out of the business, as it were, or the industry, as you call it. And presumably, before this went into print, you must have been satisfied that those were the correct words to use. And if they were, making do sounds like it's the bare minimum.
It's, I agree, a flippant comment, and not very professional.
Well, I'm not asking you whether it was a flippant comment, but whether when you use the words, we just had to make do with what we had, it sounds rather alarming that the staffing that you had was a make do, that you worked with what you had and you didn't have any more.
And what I mean by that is the contractual level of staffing, which is the number we had, and that's what we had to provide on a daily basis in line with the contractual elements of that.
Yeah.
And it was around utilising the resources that we did have.
You mean the human resources?
Human resources, sorry,
Yeah.
in the best way possible. You know, be quite innovative and supportive of everybody within the centre.
Over the page at 239, paragraph 239, you say, I believe that staff and residents were safe at all times, despite what some will describe as challenging staffing levels. I say this because there is a first response procedure in place. Staff have the opportunity to raise a first response if at any time they feel unsafe. I was always concerned about staff and had no concern above and beyond the normal concerns one would have, and this was alleviated by knowing that staff had first response available. So are you saying you had no concerns at all for staff? Everything was fine, and that they were safe because you had a first response
No, I had a lot
procedure
of
in
concerns
place?
about staff. It's about what measures you've got in place, in particular about, you know, you can argue a point how many staff is enough staff.
Yeah.
And some people will give you different figures.
Is Serco operating on 2 DCOs a wing?
No.
No. How many do you operate now?
A minimum of 3, plus 1 courtyard and a manager on each wing.
And is that contractual?
That's contractual as a minimum, but we do find depending on where you are with non-effectives or
Yeah.
leave allocation, you could have more on there.
I'm always concerned about staff. Were you always concerned about the safety of the detained population as well? Because you don't mention that here.
I was concerned about everybody. But I think the topic we were talking around was around staff.
And if you go up to paragraph 238, the problem we had in the centre is that we were constantly having to move resource around.
Yeah.
It was also difficult when staff put their own colleagues at risk by disappearing off a wing to go and do something without trying to find cover, therefore leaving their colleague on their own.
Yeah.
What did you mean by constantly having to move
So
resource around?
So there were a number of concerns. You know, there's no hiding beyond the fact it was challenging and
Dangerous?
I wouldn't say dangerous. I mean, any situation working in a custodial environment could be dangerous potentially.
But the fewer staff you have, DCOs disappearing off wings, leaving one to manage 120 men.
Yeah.
That's not potentially dangerous.
I think for the person, yeah, it is potentially dangerous, and that's why we try to install in staff. Look, we understand people need to go for a comfort break. We understand people want to go for the toilet. But the reports that were coming through, you know, that staff were mentioning was, you know, 1 minute I'd be working in there and my colleague and turn around and they'd gone to the toilet, you know, and not told me. You know, so it was about adopting a realistic approach and just trying to say stuff. Look, we know you have to go somewhere sometimes. However, if you let the Oscar one know, or the duty manager of the day that or your manager, sorry, I've got a bit of a cramp now. If you need to go off, then just let somebody know, and we can kind of backfill that space for the period of time you're going to go to the toilet and that.
The risk here, Mr. Skit, is that G4S was adhering to minimum contractual standards as regards staffing, that they stuck to them rather than make the place, rather than a make-do, making it safer for everyone. Do you think that's a fair criticism, that G4S were actually sticking to the minimum because it suited their commercial model, perhaps, to do so?
We weren't sticking to the minimum. Some days are better than others.
No, you said that some days were better than others.
And
why weren't all days better than
because
others?
you have to take into account sickness. You have to take into account some weeks you have your non-effectives built into this. You know, some days there may not be as many people on leave as you would perhaps in a summer period.
Yeah.
So there would be better days, and we weren't purposely keeping the staff down to a minimum. I'm not sure why you would want to. The way the shift patterns were worked out, staff worked a long shift for the day because that is what staff wanted to work. And I'm not necessarily say that that's my favoured approach. However, that's what was in place. So you basically split your staff 50-50 because the days that staff are working, others are not. So you lose the opportunity to utilise staff in a better way sometimes. So if you lose somebody, you lose them for the day. Whereas you have a different shift pattern. If you lost somebody in the morning, there might only be a morning shift, but you'll have somebody coming on lunchtime to cover, and you may be able to cover the morning throughout the way. So that's how the kind of detail operated.
Yeah. But in the end, this is all about planning, isn't it? Planning for eventualities, planning for the foreseeable as well as potentially the unforeseeable, isn't it?
Yeah. And there are lots of unforeseeable issues. You know, during the operation of the day, you know, you could have a number of escorts going out, which you plan for, and you've planned the staff for that. That's what you can do, and then all of a sudden you'll get an emergency escort thrown on top of it. So you've got to find another 3 staff to take that escort out, or you may find that you may get a resident that goes on a constant watch. So then you've got to find another member of staff. You know, these operational challenges work in all environments like this. Sometimes you can't predict what's going to happen during the day.
Yeah. Paragraph 247, you deal with the profit, and you talk about Sarah Newland's assessment of the profit that was built into the contract. But your last sentence is, I know this can be a subjective point, but it was my view that the Gatwick contract was very profitable for G4S. Is that how you perceived it?
That's how I perceived it, yeah.
And I have a question for you on behalf of Bat Murphy. Does that mean that G4S was maximising profits and contract compliance over the care and safeguarding of vulnerable detained persons?
Not in my opinion.
Do you remember a little earlier we were talking about additional beds, and you said certain of the detained population quite like sharing rooms, whereas others didn't? You mentioned Vietnamese and Chinese. Can we just go back to your Verita interview, VER 000248, please? Page 16. And you see there's that big answer just above 174 where well, there's a question which begins, no, it's an answer at 173. We can probably track our different populations so we know exactly what the Albanians are like. They come from Albania. If you get 50 or 60 Albanians in the centre, the dynamics will change. We got ready for a Jamaican charter, and you're asked in what way with the Albanians they have no respect, the way culturally they are. In their own country, they work in clans, depending on which family you're from. If you take one Albanian on, you take them all on. Very similar to my experience from Vietnamese in prisons, a population like that. Then you get the Nigerian Ghanaians, who in my opinion are historically quite litigate. Do you mean litigious?
Litigious.
They've probably been here in the country quite a number of years, will fight every avenue not to go, will be difficult on charters. The Jamaican population is another difficult population if you look at the Jamaican population. If they've come in here for charter removes, you find a lot of Jamaicans haven't lived in Jamaica perhaps since they were a child, or in some cases have never lived in Jamaica. It's just that the parents didn't get a British passport when they were younger. There are those dynamics. Eastern Europeans will throw in a different mix to that. And then on page 19, at the top, at 204, up until Panorama, there are a number of ongoing cases in the High Court now around 3-bedded rooms, about ventilation and around other things. That's ongoing. You say, and you're asked, and you think that's been inspired by the Panorama programme. Yes, because up to then we hadn't had any problems with the 3-person rooms. They didn't like them, but what we tended to find was that people from their own nationalities or people that were friends, the Chinese, as an example, are quite happy to have 3 people in a room because that's the way they are. They keep within themselves as a group, and so on. I'm asked to ask you this on behalf of Bat Murphy. Do you not think you were stereotyping these people?
I was trying to give an overview of what, I'm sure the original question was about the different populations and how they present as groups. Not stereotyping.
Yeah. Were these views that you think you expressed at the time? Would you have expressed these kinds of views to others, other members of staff, SMT, at Brook House?
Effectively, we knew going back then, we knew if we were getting a large intake of people from Albania in, we know what type of problems they cause. A lot of our incidents were related, netting incidents were related to certain groups of individuals. It's well known within the IRC estate, around escapes and around other issues of what different populations are difficult within that. I know the Home Office has done a lot of work, particularly around that.
Yeah.
It's not me stereotyping people. I'm just trying to give a kind of flavour of some of the different concerns that can be raised within that.
Thank you, Chair. It's 4:30, and this is the choice I'm going to present you with.
Go ahead.
I'm not finished, and I'm looking at the questions I have left of Mr. Skitt. And there are 3 or 4 topics involving some documentation which I'm going to have to show him. It would be foolish of me to say that I could finish in an hour, but there's a fair chance that I might. And if people are prepared, you, Chair, are prepared to sit to 5:30, 5:45, it would prevent us all coming back tomorrow for the sake of another hour of evidence. So I'm entirely in your hands. If you wish to rise now, of course, the transcribers would need a 5-minute break at the least. But I'm very happy. If you are Mr. Skitt, I suspect you'd prefer to finish tonight if you could. You're
Yes.
nodding. And I've spoken to Miss Blackwell already in anticipation of this potentially happening. As I say, I'm very happy to go on to finish. I'm not going to promise 5:30. It could very well be a little later, and I know it's inconvenient to others, but that's the choice. So the decision is yours, Chair.
I'm very happy to continue. Mrs. Skitt, are you sure that's okay with you? I don't want you to
Fine.
feel under pressure to continue.
No,
If it's your preference to carry on
It's my
rather than come
preference to
back
carry on,
tomorrow.
yes, rather than come back tomorrow. Yeah.
Now, Mr. Skitt, if your answers are a teeny-weeny bit shorter, we will finish this
Okay.
evening.
And can I just check that that's okay in terms of the transcribers? I'm sure Mr. Altman has checked with your face.
Yes.
Why don't we take a 5-minute break now then and then
Yeah.
return? Thank you very much. Thank you.
Right, Mr. Skid, hopefully the home straight. All right. First thing I want to ask you about, and this is on behalf of Duncan Lewis, is the Rule 40 process. Up on screen we have 2 paragraphs of a witness statement by Paul Gasson of the 8th of March, in which he says he's been referred to certain documents which show that I was notified when a detained person was placed on Rule 40. I've been asked why I was notified when a detained person was placed on Rule 40 and how I used this information. The Home Office was notified of all occasions as per Detention Centre Rule 40. The paperwork would be reviewed to ensure it was completed correctly. And then at 122, I've been referred to some other documents relating to removal from association, been asked to comment on the information I considered to determine whether an individual was suitable to be placed under Rule 40. Skipping to the next but one sentence, for the cases where I did authorise removal from association, the information I considered would have been what was presented by G4S and consideration of any alternatives to the relocation. So that is his take on the use of and the authorisation for Rule 40. Now, if we go please to a detention services order, and we will find this as CJS 000676 at page 11. And this DSO, as we can see, is removal from association, Rule 40, and temporary confinement, Rule 42. Can we go please to page 11? And at the top, Rule 40 says the Secretary of State, in the case of a contracted out detention centre, or the manager, in the case of a directly managed centre, may arrange for the detained person's removal from association. Subparagraph 2, in cases of urgency, the manager of a contracted out detention centre may assume the responsibility of the Secretary of State under paragraph 1, but shall notify the Secretary of State as soon as possible after making the necessary arrangements. And if we drop down please to paragraph 31, you'll see in bold, in those circumstances must an initial authorisation be given for a period beyond 24 hours. In normal circumstances, any use of Rule 40 or 42 for an initial 24-hour period must be authorised by a manager, executive officer or above from the HOIE IRC team in a contracted out centre. Stop there because the rest is to do with prisons. And then over the page, paragraph 32, in cases of urgency, and the footnote 4 says, for example, to protect life and or the security of the centre, for example, a fight or an assault on another detainee or member of staff, back to the top please, in cases of urgency, and if the circumstances are such that it is impracticable to seek the authority required in paragraph 31 in advance, the centre or duty manager in a contracted out or HMPPS run centre can make the emergency authorisation so that the authority is considered to begin at that point. In such circumstances, the HOIE IRC manager or the HOIE on-call manager, if out of hours, must be notified immediately. And our understanding, Mr. Skit, is in a majority of cases, the centre manager or G4S or one of the managers made the authorisation. Now, in your experience, is that right?
Depends on the incident or situation. So I deal with a lot of the Rule 40s within my role. So
Yeah.
if it's a spontaneous incident and the decision is taken by the person, I guess, in charge at the scene, they would make a dynamic decision whether to move somebody onto Rule 40.
Yeah.
And then at the earliest opportunity, they'll let the duty director know.
Yeah.
And if feel it's relevant to do that, the paperwork will be during the day, I guess, and night as well, would be completed. They would then contact the Home Office as well as the duty.
But pausing there, who would be the centre manager? Who would be giving the authorisation in the case of urgency?
There'd be the duty director.
Who, at what level would the duty director be?
It's normally my level.
Your level. So presumably you've given authorisation before?
When I've been contacted out of hours, yeah.
Mr. Saunders?
I mean, out of hours, it's normally the duty director, yeah.
But is that urgency?
It
Is that a case of urgency?
depends on the situation.
I mean, you see that the paragraph 32 at the top says, and if the circumstances are such that it is impracticable to seek the authority required in paragraph 31, that relates to the Home Office
Yeah.
individual. Do you think, Mr. Skip, that in all cases where you were asked for your authorisation, you personally, as the Deputy Director, that you were giving your authorisation in cases of urgency and that it was impracticable for the Home Office manager to give authorisation? How did you satisfy yourself that that was the case?
So if people are on site, you actually go down and kind of view.
Yeah,
If you're on call, you have to talk through with the manager on call,
yeah,
the circumstances, glean as much information as you can
yeah.
on the situation, and deem if it's appropriate to authorise that. Then normally the next phone call from the manager who's rung me up would be to the Home Office on-call
Yeah.
manager.
Not quite answering the question. What I'm asking is, how did you satisfy yourself that you should give authorisation because it was a case of urgency, as footnote 4 defines it, and in the circumstances where it was impracticable to seek the authority required in paragraph 31? Did you in all cases satisfy yourself of those conditions?
Which were on the footnote at the bottom.
No, it's on the screen at the top. In cases of urgency and if
Yeah.
the circumstances are such it's impracticable to seek the authority required in paragraph 31. My question is, did you satisfy yourself in all cases those conditions were satisfied where you were asked for authorisation?
Yes,
And is there a record of that?
there will be records with the paperwork that would have been
And
completed.
what was the nature of the paperwork where we would find it?
There to be the Rule 40 paperwork.
Did DCMs ever authorise Rule 40?
If they responded to a spontaneous incident, initially they would make the decision whether a person would need to go down to the CSU on Rule 40.
So you're happy, Mr. Skip, that if we had them, the Rule 40 authorisations, we would find that this exercise had been gone through every time that you were asked for an emergency authorisation?
I believe so.
Can I ask you about something else now, please? Coming back to Dr. Aitken's interview with you, and we can put it up on screen. It's INQ 000077 at pages 2 and 3. I want to ask you about page 2, right at the bottom. And this is an interview by Dr. Aitken, who, as I told you earlier, remind you, was doing research inside Brook House at the time. And right at the bottom, do you see right at the bottom the last few words? In my view, if a person wants to kill themselves, I think the person chooses the time, the place, and how they're going to do it. And I think if somebody does want to do it, you're never going to deter them. Deter them is my kind of view. And I'm asked on behalf of Dayton Pearce Glynn to ask you whether you see a problem with that comment.
If a person is considering self-harm or suicide, they will be the person that kind of will think it through and how they want to do where they're going to do it and how they're going to do it. That is their thought process. And I have been involved in a number of death in custodies, unfortunately, within other establishments, and sometimes you had no indication whatsoever about that person that they were ever considering such an act.
Yeah. Do you think mental health training would help officers to recognise signs?
It's I think depends what the mental health training is. I know there's lots of talk. We do mental health first aid training, but the staff are not mental health professionals.
Yeah.
And you know, does mental health first aid training help? Yes, it does. It can kind of identify signs that somebody has kind of changed, may have become withdrawn from. I've dealt with somebody recently who's kind of withdrawn and has got severe mental health problems. Shown a difference. It's just picking up, you know, and sometimes it is about understanding and knowing the people that you look after.
Yeah. I mean, when you said, I think if somebody does want to do it, you're never going to deter them.
I think what's meant by that is if somebody wants to kill themselves, sometimes you may never know. You may never pick up on the indicators, and they will just do it. I've dealt with a lot. I set up a process within Birmingham for veterans in custody, which is something I'm kind of quite close to.
Yeah.
You know, and there's a very high number of people, you know, who have committed suicide, ex-veterans and other people, where, you know, even when you hear the friends talk, would have not even kind of picked anything up if there was anything wrong.
But here, of course, this is an IRC where your officers are in control of people 24/7.
Yep.
And do you think the comment you made rather obscures the fact that part of that role should be the support or listening to people and picking up any signs that they might be suicidal?
Of course it is.
Yeah. So when you say you can't stop them, probably a bit black and white, because you probably can't you?
Sometimes you can't.
You don't think so?
Sometimes, I'm being honest, sometimes, you know, from experience, and I've sat in coroner's courts, and I've, you know, with people that I've known for a long time, and sometimes you can't.
Another topic, please, Mr. Skip, and we're getting reasonably close to the end. Can we put up on screen IMB 000202, please? Now, this is the IMB annual report for reporting year 1st of January to the 31st of December 2020, published May 2021. And if we go, please, to page 5. Towards the bottom, under main judgments, how safe is the IRC? The board's view is that due to circumstances relating to the Dublin Convention charter programme, in the latter months of 2020, Brook House was not a safe place for vulnerable detainees who'd crossed the channel in small boats. And if we go to the top of the page, that comment was probably made in relation to the first bullet point, impact of the pandemic, as the wider community was subject to restrictions following the March national lockdown, so too was the centre, its detainees and staff in particular. Throughout most of 2020 there was less free association and mixing off the wings. Accommodation moved to single occupancy, and in-person social and legal visits were stopped or restricted. The next bullet point, while we have it up, change of contract provider. from G4S to Serco. Next bullet point, charter flights to European countries shifted to detainees who'd arrived in the UK after crossing the channel in small boats. And then this final bullet, the combination of the compressed nature of the charter flight programme with Brook House as its sole base for Dublin Convention flights, and the fundamental changes in the centre's population and nationalities, their different vulnerabilities and their needs, put the centre's systems, detainees and staff under great stress and raised some serious concerns for the board. Most notably, there was a dramatic increase in levels of self-harm and suicidal ideation, deficiencies in the induction process and increased needs for legal support and detention centre Rule 35 assessments. So against that background, how safe is it, as we go to the bottom, due to circumstances relating to the Dublin Convention Charter Programme, in the latter months of 2020, Brook House was not a safe place for vulnerable detainees who'd crossed the channel in small boats. And then over the page at the top, how fairly and humanely are detainees treated. From our monitoring and observations, the board's view is that detainees are generally treated humanely at Brook House. However, the board's view is that circumstances in Brook House related to the Dublin Convention Charter Programme amounted to inhumane treatment of the whole detainee population by the Home Office in the latter months of 2020. And the latter months of 2020 were, of course, when Serco was the provider.
Yeah.
Do you agree with what I've just read to you?
Yeah.
Do you think it's a safe place now?
I'm not sure that it is referencing that it was within our care. I think there was a. I'm sure this is the. There was a big influx of residents within the Dublin Convention, which would mean that residents would go back. An agreement. Residents would go back to the country where they'd first sought asylum.
Yeah.
Not in the UK, and we received a lot of people come in to the centre, and I think it was particularly on B Wing. Whether, if I'm getting this right, there was also a political statement nationally, I think, about. I think there was a lot of public concern, and there was a few statements about we'll put people on planes and take them back. I think this is around that time, and a lot of people were putting back onto charters. We had a very difficult population on B Wing, I think I remember it was, who fell within that category. A lot of people whom did not speak English, and a lot of people who realised when they were going to be going on flights, we did have a lot of self-harms. So that is in with that, but that's not about, in my opinion, about in the way that we treated them. It was around other concerns about the numbers coming in and going out effectively.
But it still shows, and Mr. Castle dealt with this a few days ago. He was the Home Office area manager, Ian Castle. Did you know him?
Yeah.
Yeah. And he dealt with this the other day and said that it was politically driven and made things very difficult for everyone.
It was a very difficult time. I do remember it. I think I was the G director for a couple of those days, and I went down the wing quite a few times to where situations where people were distressed about being returned to where they come from.
Do you think Serco's a different place today?
I think Serco's a totally different place.
I mean, Brook House under
House,
Serco.
yeah.
It's my fault.
Yeah,
my fault.
yeah. There's, I mean, even and I think from if I look back, and from the Panorama programme, there was a lot of work put in initially by G4S,
including the action plan.
Including the action plans, the work within the centre. There was a lot of bring the centre up to a reasonable standard around staffing and around all the elements of that carried on.
Lots of dismissals.
Sorry?
Dismissals as well after Panorama.
There was, yeah, well, it was a very kind of challenging, difficult time to pick up, to pick up those bits, and there was lots of change.
Yeah.
We learnt lots of lessons. It was an horrendous program. There's no getting away from that.
Well, when you say lots of lessons learned, what do you think the principal lessons learned by you have been, Mr. Skid?
One, that staff need to be afforded the opportunity to feel safe to report any wrongdoing, because if you don't know, you can't do anything about it.
Yeah.
And to provide an environment that is safe, clean, decent, that we have appropriate staffing, we have appropriate mechanisms in place to support and look after people, and that our staff are all suitably trained to deal with individuals. And there's, I mean, since Serco's took over, there's been with the contract, the staffing levels that have been specified by the Home Office on what they want, and with the new company taking over that, the centre is a completely different place, in my opinion.
And so, if somebody, not you, but if somebody had been in Brook House in the period we're looking at and was to go into Brook House now, are you saying that they would see a very different place?
In my opinion, yes.
I suppose one could argue you would say that, wouldn't you?
But you could take somebody in and let them have a look.
All right. I have been in, as a matter of interest.
I know.
But there again, I've got nothing to compare it with, Mr. Skid. But you think, looking back and everything you learned from Panorama and since, that Brook House is not the place it was?
No, it's not.
Now, let me ask you a few more things then. Some criticisms which you've been asked to consider. First of all, Callum Tully, who made a witness statement to the inquiry last year, and if we put up on screen INQ 000052 at page 42. And it comes back to something I've asked you about already, paragraph 167. In the majority of examples outlined in this statement, and in that statement, Callum Tully had set out instances of abuse, some of which he recorded, some of which he didn't. Members of staff were present during mistreatment of detainees and for admissions of abuse and malpractice, who were otherwise well-behaving officers. This underlines the lack of confidence staff had in raising complaints about such behaviour. This culture of silence, he says at 168, across the workforce of Brook House, coupled with a lack of demonstrable oversight, interest and engagement from Ben Saunders and his senior management team, allowed the abusive culture in Brook House to fester and go unchecked. The confidence that officers and managers had to, in front of other members of staff, flagrantly brag and joke about abuse or speak in derogatory or even racist terms about detainees, demonstrated their faith in the culture of silence which allowed the abuse to persist. And over the page, paragraph 169, furthermore, it's clear from the evidence that I amassed during my employment at Brook House that although the abuse of detainees was consistent throughout my time there, the staff members responsible for that abuse changed over time. Some abusive members of staff left Brook House only for others to continue the abuse. This, in my view, demonstrated that the abuse at Brook House was not because of a few bad apples operating unbeknown to others, but because of cultural, he says systematic, he probably means systemic failings, which gave rise to this behaviour, allowed it to go unchallenged, and dissuaded members of staff from raising concerns about it. Detainees suffered as a consequence. Anything about any of that you want to disagree with, Mr. Skid?
I wasn't aware of those things. I mean, the one thing I would like to say, I think, I also form the opinion that Callum Tully worked for G4S. and had he had the integrity to raise these concerns to us rather than sit on them for what I would consider some time before reporting them, we may have had an opportunity to understand what was going on. He was, he worked for us. There are a number of ways he could have put that information through.
But he had no confidence.
But he could have gone to the IMP, he could have gone to the police, he could have gone to the Home Office. There are a number of ways, he could have put in a speak out for himself. There are a number of ways, I believe, this is my opinion, that Callum Tully could have reported these.
The irony, Mr. Skitt, is what encouraged him to go to the BBC was the Medway programme, which went out, if my memory serves me, on the 12th of January 2016. No, the 11th, and he emailed the BBC on the 12th. And it was that influenced his behaviour.
Yeah.
And there's an irony there. I'm not going to take you through the Medway report, but there are comparisons. You must have read it. There are comparisons, aren't there, between what happened at Medway and what happened at Brook House, and it was that encouraged him to go to the BBC. And one understands your criticisms of him, but he made a decision, and here we all are.
Yeah, I accept that as well.
Michelle Brown, sorry, I interrupted you.
We failed on that. I understand that.
Yeah. A couple more things. Michelle Brown, who we may hear from next week, INQ 000164. She made a lengthy statement to the inquiry, and there are a couple of things I'd like to ask you about there, please, if I may. INQ 000164. That's her first and I think only witness statement. On page 6, at the top, when I agreed to take up the post as head of security in June 2017, I didn't receive any assistance from Steve Skitt before, during or after taking this role. I remember attending a meeting with him for a handover as he was previously covering security. This meeting was merely minutes long, and I remember being told at the time it's like round pegs and round holes. Probably meant square pegs and round holes, or round pegs and round holes. Do you remember saying it?
Can't recall exactly
No.
saying it. But
He also expressed that he'd just been babysitting the role, as he was aware that there would be a permanent appointment at some point. I don't recall any discussions in terms of role requirements, delivery, objectives or strategy. Do you accept the criticism, or do you reject it?
I reject it.
Next but one paragraph, about halfway down, she says, there was also an occasion where I was attending a CNR refresher course. I was in the admin area waiting for it to start, and Steve called me a chav in front of several other staff, in which I took offence. I don't believe that was Steve's intention. He was merely clumsy in his words. I recall talking to him about this, and he passed it off in jest, making a reference that he was also from a rough area, in other words, the Black Country. Did you call her a chav?
I did, and I regret those were not appropriate comments to say.
Yeah. In front of other people, presumably.
There was a few people there. I think, I said it. I'm not going to sit here and try and...
No. But the point is, as Deputy Director, people expect behaviour beyond reproach, don't they?
And, I thought the conversation was, my recollection, Michelle will have a kind of banter with other staff, for want of a better word. I don't particularly like the word banter, but that's the only word I can kind of...
Well, it's a word we've heard from a lot of people, Mr. Skitt, that it was all just banter.
She would joke with other people about certain things. I misread the situation. I shouldn't have said it. End of story.
Next paragraph, as I continued to work with Steve, I didn't believe him to be vindictive towards staff or detainees. I witnessed numerous occasions in meetings whereby Steve would make random or unrelated comments out of topic that caused confusion or awkwardness, which became an accepted custom. I sensed some frustration towards Steve from the Home Office, as local personnel would come to me rather than Steve for clarity, information, or to get things done. Agree? Disagree?
Agree partly with some of it, yeah.
And Steve Skitt and I did occasionally meet up in his office. He would be caring in his nature towards me. However, in professional terms, I found it difficult to get a definitive response to queries, and as much as I could rephrase questions or push for answers, often I left his office more confused than when I initially went in. A good analogy of interactions with Steve Skip between myself and others would be the fork handles for candles, the Ronnie Barker scene without the humour. It takes a person of a certain generation to understand what she's talking
Yes,
about,
I
Mr.
know,
Skip, but I
yes,
suspect you and I certainly do.
Yes, we do, probably.
So, do you understand what she's saying?
Yeah.
And do you agree?
That's her opinion.
One other thing I do need to ask you about, her page 57, please. Paragraph 119. Is that on the same page, Zainab, or a previous page? You need to scroll up. That's it. She has read, she says, VER 000221 regarding my interview with Kate Lampard and Ed Marsden. I can distinctly recall stating to Ben Saunders and Steve Skitt in January 2016, and January 2016, of course, is when the Medway programme went out. We're going to have a panorama on our hands here if we do not learn from Medway. I believe Stacey Dean and Jules Williams were also present in the room. I can recall this as I remember I was disturbed by the images that I saw from the Medway broadcast that I watched a day earlier, and feeling in a place of total bewilderment. There was no reaction or acknowledgement from Ben Saunders or Steve Skitt. Now, first of all, did she say that?
I can't remember the specific date or time. What I can remember, there was a lot of talk amongst a lot of people, amongst the SMT, over a period of time about Medway. We could, of course, get a first kind of hand experience of some of the issues, because obviously Ben had went there later, but it was talked about, and I think most probably other centres and everybody else would look at that and try and learn lessons from it.
But if she said this, and if you accept she did say such a thing, we're going to have a panorama on our hands if we don't learn from Medway. But the obvious question, if you knew nothing that was going on, Mr. Skid, is what do you mean?
What's the context about it? I could make that comment.
Yeah. What did it mean to you if she said that?
You know, Medway's come out. We need to make sure we learn lessons from that and look at some of the underlying issues around that.
What were the underlying issues in Medway?
I can't recall them all now.
No. Well, there was excessive use of force.
Yeah.
Staff problems, abuse. I mean, if these things were going on in Medway and she was trying to get a message across, that could happen here, isn't the natural instinct to say, well, what are you talking about? We don't have those problems here.
Yeah. I mean, I can't recall that. I know there were a number of conversations, and I'm not saying that Michelle didn't say that.
Yeah.
There were quite a number of conversations around that.
And if we drop down to the next but one paragraph, in addition, I investigated and substantiated several complaints regarding staff bullying each other, staff bullying detainees, displaying racist and inappropriate conduct dating back as far as 2012, but there was little or no outcome. I continued to raise concerns with Ben Saunders and Steve Skitt. I didn't see an improvement, and as previously disclosed in my statement, I used the whistleblowing hotline to report. I honestly did as much as I possibly could, but that clearly wasn't enough. Did she raise concerns with you and Ben Saunders? Because if she did, Mr. Skitt, it presents a completely different picture to the one that you've painted.
It may have been concerns that have been investigated and dealt with. I mean, which is going back to 2012.
What about bullying detainees by staff?
Well,
Because, I mean, you'll remember you saying your witness statement and you've told us, in effect, you were unaware of it.
Well, I don't know whether this is going back to 2012 or,
No.
you know, you need some more context on that.
Well, I'm sure when she comes, she'll be asked that question. But if she was talking about more recent events, post-Medway, what do you say?
Again, I have no kind of context into...
You've no context. Right. Well, we'll take that answer, Mr. Skid. And finally, a word I'm sure everybody has been looking forward to. Aaron Stokes, who gave evidence. Do you remember Aaron Stokes?
I do, yes.
He was a DCO and he gave evidence to the inquiry on the 9th of March. Can we just put up on screen a transcript, INQ 000167, please? At page 43. And top left, page 169, line 13. He was asked about the completion of his training, and he worked in the centre from the start of 2017, but he handed in his notice on the 14th of August, and there were two reasons for leaving. The first was because he got a career opportunity in an area in which he wished to work, and he said that's correct, and he was even maybe actively looking for jobs while he was there. Yes, that's correct. As soon as I obviously worked as a baggage handler, then had what you would call like a step-up job sort of thing, a gap job, waiting for my employment in electrical engineering, scrolling through all the recruitment websites to see what I could find. And the other reason for handing in your notice, which you've talked about already with us, so the shift work and also the nature of the role, is that fair? Yes, that's fair. Did G4S know what your leaving reason was? Do you remember? Line 11, from what I recall, no. I remember handing in my notice then, that was it, and that's all I heard of it. And then at the top of the next page, line, forgive me, line 8, did you tell the staff at Brook House anything about your reason for wanting a transfer? You've been talking about wanting a transfer to Tinsley House. Or did you just ask for a transfer, if you remember? I asked for a transfer. I think it was a hire manager, senior manager at the time, Stephen Skitt. Remember his name from memory. I requested to him saying, basically, I couldn't really handle the stresses anymore, and I needed a new environment to see if I could take me away from my current situation and see if that would benefit me at all in the long run. But then after that, I didn't really hear much back, to be honest with you. So you never heard back about your request to transfer to Tinsley. It took a while. I got the request back saying that it was denied, basically, in short. And dropping to the next page at line 10, what sort of help, other than the transfer to Tinsley, were you hoping or expecting to have? I'd say more support from management, really. They saw they could see me. I came to them struggling. I was hoping they could have provided more. As in such, they did recommend me to a healthcare professional, which is okay, but I needed help at that point in time. And from my belief, I believe they failed in that completely. And he was then asked, I know you can't be completely sure, but you think it might have been Mr. Skitt you spoke to. Do you remember anyone else you spoke to seeking this sort of help? Yeah, I think it was. I vaguely remember having an interview with Ben Saunders, which I believe was the overall manager at the house itself. Any recollection of any of this, Mr. Skitt?
I think so, and I think at the time he requested a transfer to Tinsley. I think it was shut.
So if he requested a transfer, that had to be between September 2016 and May 2017.
I can't remember the exact dates.
Problem is he started at the beginning of 2017. He handed in his notice on the 14th of August. And although it's not entirely clear from this, other than if we go back to page 170, let's just see if he said when he handed in his request for a transfer. At line 14, in May 27, he's asked you wanted to transfer to Tinsley House, so you refer to an email which you sent on the 5th of May requesting a transfer to Tinsley. So that was when Tinsley had reopened, wasn't it?
I'm not quite sure.
Well, that's what we've been told, Mr. Skitt. September 2016, it was closed for refurbishment, reopening in about May. So, but can you remember any reason why a transfer would be denied?
There could be a number of reasons why you would deny transfer. I mean, it is a long time ago, and I'm trying to recall on my memory to try and assist.
Did you think you're supportive of staff or unsupportive, as Mr. Stokes seemed to be suggesting here?
I don't think so, personally.
You don't think so?
I mean, I can't recall this particular...
Yeah. So you think you're supportive of staff?
I think I'm supportive of staff, yeah.
5:22. Those are all the questions I'm going to ask, Chair, leaving you 8 minutes for yours.
Thank you very much, Mr. Altman. I do have a couple of questions, Mrs. Skitt, but I will try very hard to keep them to within now 9 minutes that we've got until 5:30. The first question that I've got is in relation to something that you said about Mr. Altman asked you about some of the comments that you made in your interview with Kate Lampard, I believe, or it might have been Ed Marsden who you actually spoke to, where you were referring to certain risks that were associated with certain groups of people in the IRC estate. And you said, let me just check my notes to make sure that I'm quoting you accurately, that it was information that the Home Office were doing a lot of work around which detained populations might present certain challenges across the IRC estate. Can you tell me a bit more about that? Do you mean that they were doing work in the form of security intelligence briefings? Was it done locally? Was this something coming centrally from the Home Office? What can you recall?
I believe we knew from... the data will be there. We know we had a lot of incidents over a period of time. We know we had a lot of escapes, a lot of the concerted indisciplines at here, Heathrow and other sites indicated that it was the Albanian population who would be more inclined to do these demonstrations, nettings, you know, I think the historical data's there. And I think recently, I think it's detention escorting services were kind of doing a piece of work around this, particularly around the makeup within the estate. And I think they try and keep... We continue to monitor the numbers and wings that we would put certain, that population on.
So is your understanding that you... presumably individual centres produce the data because you're saying about which incidents happen and identifying which groups of detainees might be involved, and then that gets fed up to somebody centrally and then fed back down as a kind of collated piece of data?
So we now produce... We used to do it before, but we didn't have to do it because we weren't contractual, but we recently asked if we could do it again to highlight on a daily basis our breakdown of population. So that information goes up so it can be monitored, I assume, by the Home Office.
Okay.
So you don't get too many particular population in one centre.
Okay, thank you very much. And you gave us the name of the department you believe it was that. Thank you, that's great. The other question that I had in relation to, obviously you've got very many years' experience across secure settings, both in public sector settings, private sector settings, and in all different categories, different types of security. You therefore will have had lots of experience of having been inspected, and also having had the IMB produce annual reports. And for both of those organisations, obviously part of their statutory remit is to identify areas of concern or to identify recommendations. I just want your opinion about this, so I'm not going to quiz you about any individual inspection. In your experience, is it usually the case that the issues that are identified to you are issues that are a surprise to you at an SMT level, or do they tend to be issues that you are aware of?
probably normally issues that we may be aware of from either previous reports. I mean, I know one of the ones certainly at Brook House is the use of restraints on escorts. You know, and I think it was highlighted in an HMIP report previously that we were using restraints too often, and you know, so we've done a bit of work around that. It's closely monitored by the IMB because they have the same view, and there's been a dramatic reduction, in my opinion, about the use of restraints on escorts. So that would be just one example. But I think with IMBs, I think I've always found through my career, you know, you have a professional, positive relationship with the IMBs, and they will tend to talk to you when you're going around and raise any particular issues if they feel it's appropriate. So sometimes, you know, you can deal with them straight away. But you know, but they do provide their yearly report, which is obviously a number of recommendations, if there are any, that we'll act on.
And obviously the inspection works in a very different way, so these are not people that are there routinely in the same way that the IMB are. Is your experience the same in that regard? Does the inspectorate tend to identify issues that you as an SMT are already aware of?
Sometimes yes, sometimes no. Because sometimes, you know, their remit is a specific remit on what they look at, and you know, they may pick up things that you may not have been acutely aware of that you need to look at.
Okay, thank you. One final question. Again, in relation to your experience of having worked in other secure settings, and you've told us a little bit, we've heard some evidence as well about the experience of other members of SMT. Did you feel, and we're talking about the relevant period obviously here, if you had concerns regarding, I'm going to give you a specific example, but there might be others as well, if you'd had concerns about the number of staff that you needed to keep a certain number of detainees safe, based on your experience in other secure settings, do you feel that that voice was listened to as part of the SMT?
Yes, and I think we tried on a daily basis to do, you know, utilise the resources that we had got. And I know some work was done afterwards around extra resourcing for staffing. And taking it outside, just on my experience, it's a similar situation that is not unique to Brook House. It's a similar situation in other places I've worked. You know, when you're working around profiles that were designed potentially some time ago, the contract, I think, you know, there were a number of contractual extensions, and I guess in some respects you would look forward to the renewing of, you know, the specification coming through, but I think in the case of last time, the staffing levels didn't change.
Are you talking just about other private sector
No,
places that you've worked? Then do you
public
apply
sectors,
that?
I probably had more difficulties in public sector prisons than I have within private sector prisons with staffing.
Okay, thank you, Mrs. Skip. Those are all the questions, and we have 1 minute to spare.
So, Chair, the bad news is I don't think we can sit tomorrow. The better news is we will be back, I think, at 10 o'clock on Monday.
Thank you. I'm very grateful that you've stayed late today. I know it's been a very long day. I do really appreciate your evidence, so thank you very much for coming in today. And I will see you Monday at 10. Thank you.
Not before, Chair. Thank you.